Chapter 131 The Strange Swordsman. Thales followed Merc while they toured around the imposing, yet repetitive layout of Heroic Spirit Palace. To avoid the 5 Archduke's ears, they finally arrived before an open-air observation tower. Thales saw the 2 people who made him grit his teeth with hatred. Such a calm appearance, it seems like you have adapted quite well, young prince. The head of the White Blade Guards, Nicholas had already removed his cape and scarf as he stood with his back against the scenery outside of the observation tower. With a calm expression, he looked at the Prince of Constellation, who wore an expression that indicated he was critical of Nicholas's wrongdoings. If you are referring to the fact that I was almost forced to use a sword, which I could not even lift to kill myself by slitting my throat in front of 6 old men, Thales let out a long puff of air and said resentfully, then, yes, I am getting by quite well. Old men, I remember Archduke Pofred of the Beacon Illumination City still being very young. He can't be considered old. Nicholas chuckled lightly like he was making fun of Thales, which made Thales even more resentful. I'm starting to feel a little suspicious. Was what you conveyed really King Nuven's aspiration? Full of anger, Thales stared at the 2 people with a hostile expression. Perhaps, my life, was not within his consideration at all. Marquis Shiles of Camus looked slightly embarrassed. About that, I did remind you before that King Nuven's attitude would possibly be a little tough and cruel. Thales suddenly turned his head around and stared at him. Alright, His Majesty is not just tough, he is also a little bit, under Thales' angry glare, Shiles rubbed the staff in his hand and smiled awkwardly. After pondering for a moment, he finally found 2 more suitable words and he blinked his eyes as he said, wild and untrammeled. Thales took a deep breath and with great difficulty, he resisted the urge to yell at Shiles. If we encounter matters like this in the future, before you push me into some deadly trap, just tell me in standard, common language without any Northland or Western accents, and communicate with the usual rhetoric. Thales stared at the 2 of them with a cold gaze and enunciated each word clearly when he said, is this how you treat your collaborator and alliance? Also, forcing a 7-year-old child to kill himself, is there any glory in that? Nicholas and Shiles exchanged glances. The former did not have any changes in his facial expression, whereas the latter propped up his staff and bowed lightly in a polite manner. Forced glory, I think you've misunderstood. Marquis Shiles sighed and he immediately turned serious. From the beginning till the end, the Archdukes only discussed about killing you as well as the advantages and consequences of the act. As for the method and whether it went against their idea of glory, it was merely how a chef served his dishes, it did not really matter. Thales furrowed his brows tightly. So, you already knew what circumstance I would face from the start. Nicholas shrugged. As for being a 7-year-old and a child, Shiles said with a solemn expression, I believe, you are probably aware. Due to your reputation and performance, no one dares to treat you like a normal 7-year-old child. Not only that, you are in Extat, and in the eyes of many, you are a symbol, the heir of Constellation. The Marquis of Camus took a deep breath and he was lost in thought as he stared at the floor tiles of Heroic Spirit Palace. That is far more important than your age, your inner quality, your reputation, and even more important than your own being. No one cares if you are a child. Filled with complicated feelings, Thales twitched his face and could not help but laugh out loud. Damn it. These politicians. Stop acting like a girl who feels wronged, young prince. Nicholas crossed his arms and snorted coldly. Guts and courage are a Northlander's most admired inner qualities. If you can't even pass the first stage. You know, not everyone has the qualifications to be in an alliance with the king. Thales clenched his teeth tightly. Then, the second prince sneered. Hey, this way of testing if someone is qualified for an alliance is truly rare. As it should be. Nicholas shrugged and lowered his head to peer at the Prince of Constellation. His eyes glinted with exotic colors. Welcome to Northland. The 3 of them stayed silent for a few seconds. So, did Nuven find his enemy? That co-conspirator and person who framed Lampod? Thales tried his best to calm down. He is also your enemy. Marquis Shiles smiled lightly. Since you've already met the king for the first time and the first step of the trap is completed, our follow-up plan shall. There will be no follow-up, Thales said faintly. Shiles and Nicholas were both stunned. Thales lifted his head and the anger in his eyes had transformed into determination. I absolutely cannot do things according to their rules. Otherwise. Serena Corleone and Chapman Lampard's figures flashed before his eyes. I won't even know when I've been betrayed. Nuven's plan ends here. Thales heard himself enunciating each word clearly and with repressed emotions. He said, I am not that old man's toy for him to manipulate. Shiles had a very unpleasant smile upon hearing this. What do you mean? Nicholas's gaze became increasingly colder. Listen, if Nuven wants my help, then he better respect my aspirations and my life. Thales said in resolution and he did not fall back when he confronted Nicholas's violent gaze. For the following matter, you have to do as I say. The head of the White Blade Guards shut his mouth and exhaled roughly from his nose. Now is not the time for you to get into a huff, young prince. Nicholas narrowed his eyes slightly. His gaze showed his eerie coldness and his tone was creepy. Do not forget that you are in Extit's Dragon Cloud City. You are away from your father, the king, and your attendants are not by your side. Plus, Heroic Spirit Palace is very dangerous. There are a lot of supernatural stories about life-threatening events that happened here. Nicholas's eyes were basically burning into him. I cannot do anything about that. After all, I am only 7 years old. Thales disregarded the consequences, and was determined to take the initiative into his own hands. You know, if I accidentally lose my life here, you... Nicholas cut him off coldly. We have numerous ways to fix a disobedient child without harming his life. Also, do not forget, Nicholas turned his head sideways and revealed the uniquely shaped sword hilt on his back. He was not subtle when he threatened Thales. I am very good in dealing with people whose last name is Jadestar, especially people like the second prince. Thales secretly gritted his teeth. Are you really that pleased with yourself that 12 years ago, you killed the Sword of Reversing Light on the battlefield? In Shile's eyes, the second prince had refuted in a rude manner. I have seen the battlefield and I know that, he collapsed from the 11 wounds on his body. You are only one of the few hundred people who besieged him, and it was just a coincidence that you struck the final blow. Compared to forcing a 7-year-old child to kill himself, your glorious military successes were not any better too. Nicholas quietly stared at him and slowly put down his folded arms. The expression on his face slowly changed from menacing to one with an intent to kill. All right, Marquis Shiles promptly walked between the two of them and smiled as he tried to resolve the dispute. As allies, we should not break our promise before we achieve our goal. This is not a good way to make a deal. Maybe King Nuven should find another ally, Thales replied coldly. The type that can give away one's life for him at any time. This is not Constellation, where you can boss people around, brat of the Empire, Nicholas mocked. You better be clear on this. You must carefully do as we say. How about this? The second prince cut off Nicholas. Before Nicholas's intimidating look, Thales broke into laughter, but this did not last long as his expression instantly turned cold. I will find those 5 archdukes and have a heart-to-heart conversation with them. Shiles furrowed his brows. Imagine this. King Nuven is currently looking for the murderer who killed his son behind the scenes, and all of you are on his list of possibilities. Nicholas and Shiles' expression slowly changed. Before Nicholas's murderous gaze and Shiles' tightly furrowed eyebrows, Thales threatened them slightly and said, no matter who he confirms to be the murderer, Nuven will skin that person alive. Then, what will that result in? That's right, the real murderer will become even more vigilant and Nuven's vengeance will fail, unless he wants to get rid of all 5 archdukes at once. The next day, the murderer will go back to his own territory and continue to be at large, his hatred only becoming deeper. Then, in 8 or 10 years, just wait for Nuven to pass away, wait for the King Selection Congress, and wait for the new common elected king to be crowned. Thales narrowed his eyes. I truly wish the Walton family the best of luck. I am very much looking forward to representing Constellation in the future and establishing a good diplomatic relationship with the new king, as well as support him and the archdukes in handling Extit's internal affairs. Such as conferring the hairless dragon Cloud City to another ruling family. Nicholas and Shiles' expression became increasingly sour. So, it is in your best interest to respect the future Supreme King of Constellation, Northlanders. Thales snorted. Using your words, carefully do as I say. Thales seemed to be at ease now as he raised his right forefinger in a rude manner and pointed it up in the air. He then said some words that turned the head of the White Blade Guards pale. Also, do not call me citizen of the Empire. Every time you remind me of that, I always feel like I am not in Extit, but in the Great Empires. Northland Province. The Prince of Constellation ignored the two of them as well as their interesting facial expressions as he turned around and left. What are you looking at? On a street in Armor District, Miranda turned over to ask Cohen. Nothing. Cohen shifted his gaze away from the alley and mumbled to himself, I saw a strange man in the alley, and there were 2 swords fastened by his waist. Swords? Miranda appeared serious. Is he our target? What does he look like? He looks like, I didn't pay much attention earlier. Cohen scratched his head desperately and wrinkled his brows. I can't remember his face. Miranda sighed. Be more alert. Big Leather Belt said that there's been some new faces here recently. Just like us. The two of them passed a street corner and came before an unfrequented butcher's shop. Are you the owner here? Cohen knocked on the big wooden window of the butcher's shop and asked the busy Far Easterner inside, Mr. Gu. The Far Easterner, who was chopping meat, slowly raised his head. Medium build with smooth brows, straight hair and black eyes. He's no different from the Far Easterners in Constellation, Cohen thought. The Far Easterner glanced at the both of them and then lowered his head again to handle his meat. Cohen was momentarily stunned and he continued to say, hey. However, the Far Easterner spoke directly and killed the words in Cohen's mouth. 1 silver coin for the inner city, 2 for city perimeter, 1 more silver coin for the upper 3 districts, add another silver coin if it's related to nobles and officials. The owner of the butcher shop, Gu, chopped up a big bone on his chopping board and said proficiently, add 2 more silver coins for counts and above. As for archdukes, the king and the temple, the rate starts from 2 gold coins. What? Cohen appeared confused. On the other hand, Miranda looked at Gu's chopping board thoughtfully. For the price of information, Gu did not even lift his head when he spoke the common language in his unique Northland accent. There'll be no bargains. Huh, Cohen furrowed his brows. 1 silver coin. If you've attracted some problems that require mediation, Gu did not pay any attention to him and minded his own business as he hung the cut meat onto the hook. His speech was hardly dilatory. That depends on who you've offended. 9 silver coins for average individuals, 1 gold coin for Gleeward, 2 for Vlad, 5 for the merchants in Dragonwings Plaza, 2 for soldiers and 3 for nobles or officials. As for counts and above, I cannot do anything. Gu wiped his hands and shifted his dull gaze to the 2 of them. If you've offended the temple or the king, get lost immediately. Don't bring me bad luck. Cohen's face was filled with doubts when he asked, why 5 gold coins for merchants? Why is the price for them higher than nobles? After all. The next moment, Gu lifted his right hand and stopped Cohen from speaking. Then, without batting an eyelid, the owner of the butcher shop quietly extended his left hand and flattened it, so that his palm was facing upwards. Once again, Cohen was bewildered. But before Cohen could respond or reply, Miranda reached out and removed the wallet from Cohen's waist. We want to ask about an incident that recently happened in this district. 2 groups of swordsmen once fought here. Under Cohen's resentful gaze, Miranda seemed to be pleased with herself as she took out a Northland gold coin, a small metallic disc that was engraved with Rakeru's portrait and a dragon. That's the money I exchanged with Caslin. Cohen rolled his eyes. Miranda calmly loosened her 2 fingers and the gold coin fell onto Gu's palm. You seem like generous and lavish foreign customers. Gu narrowed his eyes and raised the gold coin on his hand. He then flicked the edge of the coin and whistled. If this is only for your information, I do not give change. Treat the extra as tips. Miranda did not change her tone and her gaze was sharp. As long as it's worth the money. Tips. Cohen stared at the gold coin, wide-eyed and then back at Miranda. His eyes were full of disbelief. Do you know how to count, my lady? Gu chuckled lightly, but his next words surprised the both of them. No. Miranda furrowed her brows tightly. What do you mean? The information you want, the fight between the swordsmen, I've never heard of it. Gu shook his head. But for the sake of the gold coin, you can change the question. Miranda turned and pondered. In that case, are there any new and strange swordsmen roaming about nearby? Cohen recalled what he saw earlier and muttered, right, I think I saw a swordsman with 2 swords. Gu's gaze suddenly froze. 2 swords. Strange swordsman. He sighed in secret. Could it be you? Also no. Gu calmly kept the gold coin and lowered his head to continue his work on the matter at hand. All right, you've used up your quota. Both of you may leave now. The 2 of them were simultaneously stunned. The police officer and the young woman could not fathom the situation as they exchanged glances. Miranda's eyes were filled with resentment, while Cohen just spread his hands. An exchange of equal value. Looks like this principle isn't practiced in all places. Just as Miranda was about to voice up, she was pulled back and interrupted by Cohen. The blonde police blew a puff of air and laughed. At the next second, Cohen smashed his fist into the shop's window frame. Thud. Gu raised his head and stared at him in a hostile manner. I know, in a lot of places where intense situations go on, they all have a rule. It doesn't matter if it's on the battlefield, in pubs or in shops. Cohen's lips curled into a smile as he looked at Gu, who appeared cold and callous. However, Cohen's face was filled with sincerity. It's called, the first lesson, right? Gu did not speak. He only stared at him quietly. Newcomers and foreigners always get played during the first time. They end up losing some money and learning a lesson. Cohen lightly tapped on the window frame. At the same time, you get to explore the newcomer's background. Those who are strong and have powerful backgrounds would save face, then forgive and forget. Cohen shut his eyes and nodded as he said, while those who are weak would count their losses and be more polite the next time around. Cohen tilted his head, leaned next the window and put on a smile. He imitated Gu's manner from a moment ago and whistled. So, those who act as owners usually have a good ability in making judgments. You can't afford to go wrong. Miranda watched Cohen acting like an old ruffian and chuckled quietly in her heart. This idiot. He's learned quite a few things from the Western front lines. Oh, Gu narrowed his eyes and smiled. So, do you have powerful strength or strong and powerful support? Maybe we have both. Cohen sighed helplessly and flashed the saber by his waist. Since you've already received the money. Gu sneered and shook his head. I already gave you an answer. That is not an answer we are satisfied with. You are being perfunctory, Miranda said with a cold voice. We do not wish to use force in doing this. Gu raised his eyebrows. He could tell from their movements that the both of them were ruthless characters. The man is probably a warrior, who's skilled in direct attacks and battlefield techniques. As for the woman. Strange, I cannot make it out. Those fellows along the streets are not blind. Despite that, the thieves, child beggars and swindlers do not dare to touch them. However, I will repeat my words. We are looking for a group of strange swordsmen about the level of superclass. Cohen smiled. They have relations with the firearms black market and they are very cruel in their actions. Compared to the average swordsman, they are probably slightly stronger. Gu took a breath and exhaled lightly. A group of strange swordsmen. Honestly, I almost thought that they were here to find you. Black Sword. In the next moment, the Far Easterner wore a helpless smile before Miranda and Cohen. Regarding transactions of the black market, Vlad is more familiar than me. But that group of people you want to find. Alright, Gu laughed and simultaneously pulled up the bone knife from the chopping board. There are indeed a few strange people here, they're bad-tempered and they stay away from strangers. The type of people who hold swords and use the power of eradication. Miranda and Cohen exchanged glances with each other. Chapter 132 Who are you? Every choice had its corresponding price. After expressing ruthless words like, you must listen to me, to King Nuven's two representatives and confidently turning around to leave, the miserable-looking Thales got caught up in a dejected entanglement. Obviously, whether it was for the continuation of the Walton family, the simple benefit of Dragon Cloud City, the resolution of a threat before he died, or even for so-called personal vengeance, Nuven VII was determined to find the mastermind who conspired with Lampod. To achieve this target, all other matters, including his own life, seemed negligible at this point, so much so that it could be sacrificed at any time. Thales was almost 100% certain that in Nuven's original plan, he was just a bait. There were no other possible roles for him. But the prince gritted his teeth. Even if I borrow power and make use of constellation to intimidate others as well as take the initiative in my own hands, how do I, under the circumstance of not harming myself, find our common enemy, that person who commands the so-called traitors of the Tower of Eradication? I don't know what Nuven thinks of my performance, but if I can't help him find the enemy, Thales recalled King Nuven's expression. And he sighed. Hiya, welcome to Northland. He needed help, regardless of whether it was Putre's advice, Waya's sword, Ralph's psionic ability, or Ida's strength. I must meet up with them immediately. Thales lifted his head and got a shock. He realized that as he was deep in his thoughts, he had unconsciously walked a far distance. But he did find Merc, who was guiding him in his original position. In short, Thales stared awkwardly at the strange hallway and stairs before him. There were crude decorations on the wall, and stone windows on both sides. He was lost. Thales immediately turned around. But after he imagined himself saying, sorry, can you tell me the directions to the way back? To Nicholas and Shiles as well as how the both of them would look at him, he firmly removed the option of returning back to where he started. Thales turned his head around cluelessly. The problem is, the decorations and layouts around Heroic Spirit Palace are truly very similar. Every time I pass a corner, I feel like I'm back at the same place. I can only move forward now. When I come across guards or servants, I can ask for directions. Thales sighed and walked forward with huge strides. That was, until he walked through a tall arched door in his confusion. It was a huge room, which unlike the other places in the Heroic Spirit Palace, did not have lit furnaces and braziers. However, the huge windows in the room were opened and from the outside, white light was casted into the room. Metal shelves hung one by one from the ceiling, and on top of them were seemingly sparkling and translucent silver gems that reflected the light from outside of the window. There were rows after rows of bookshelves. Thales was stupefied as he stared at the 2 rows of big, black bookshelves right in front of him. Every row was about 8 to 9 meters long and the gap between them was just as wide as 2 people. He furrowed his brows. It seems like I have barged into a library. No wonder there are no fire baskets. Thales observed his surroundings. Strange, there's no one in sight. He took a step forward and extended his head into the gap between the 2 rows of bookshelves, wanting to catch a glimpse of the other side of the room, but the effort was to no avail. Firstly, the room seemed to be extremely huge, and secondly, he discovered that the black bookshelves were arranged in a circular arc instead of a straight line, so, he could not see the other end of the room. Behind the 2 rows of bookshelves were still numerous bookshelves which extended continuously to the end of his vision. He sighed. If this is a library, there should be someone guarding it, right? Is there anyone here? Thales cautiously opened his mouth and yelled. Can someone tell me the directions to the Hall of Heroes? There was no reply. Thales shook his head. These bookshelves cut off a great amount of sound transmission. He had no choice but to walk into the gap between the 2 rows of bookshelves. He walked past row after row of black wooden bookshelves. Each bookshelf had approximately 10 rows of books, and each row was separated with a thick, black wooden board. From his feet all the way up to the ceiling, they were no less than 7 of 8 meters in height. Of course, books were placed upon these bookshelves, from thin paperbacks to thick hardcovers as well as numerous scrolls, which were placed upright. Many books were heavy, but ancient and unadorned. Some were even ancient books made of parchment. Those books had a long historical standing, but they were preserved in good condition. The ancient language of the empire was engraved at the side of every bookshelf, and it clearly indicated the category of every row: poems, literature, history, politics, music scores, autobiographies, and even the king's governmental decrees. Many of them were old books that could not be seen in Mindy's hall. God, Thales leaned against one of the bookshelves and stood on his tippy toes to look at a thick book with a brown cover. As soon as he saw it, he fell into a daze. The collected imperial orders of the empire, year 1 to year 230. This is, if I calculate the time, it is year 600 according to the calendar of eradication and year 1500 according to the empire calendar. A book from almost 2,000 years ago. No, this is a duplicated copy, Thales immediately realized from its degree of wear and tear. But, an idea flashed across Thales' mind. If this book is from before the Battle of Eradication, then, regardless of whether it's about the history of wizards, the magic tower or magic, there must be some remaining clues. At least, there should be a brief mention about it. For example, that book, Battle of Eradication Chronicles, the world's destruction, which he found in Mindy's hall. Did it not already mention the alchemy tower? Thales' eyes sparkled. He never believed that the prohibition humans had towards magic would be completely unimpeachable. Otherwise, why would people like Ramon still exist? He continued to move forward, and from time to time, he would pull out a few books that he could carry. He would then flip open the first few pages and briefly glance through them. There were quite a number of similar books. There were books written in the common language as well as the ancient language of the empire. Some were even written in a strange language that he had never seen before. Luckily, the special training Gilbert provided him came in handy. Thales' level of the common language would help him understand the cover and the general content without any problem. As for the ancient language of the empire, which he was not proficient in, the grammar and spelling were a lot more complicated compared to the common language, but there were plenty of root words and affixes that shared the same meaning between the language he used in his previous world and the language he used here. So, he would still be able to obtain an answer based on the given context. Gilbert told him that after the ancient empire crumbled, the ancient language of the empire used by nobles as well as officials slowly transformed into a ceremonious language of rhetoric and literature. This was when the common language began to gradually form. Thales held his breath and suppressed the excitement in his heart. It was as if he had traveled back to the past, to a time where he was also walking in between rows of bookshelves. The Holy Decree of the Bright God. This is a history book recording the past achievements of the empire's former Orthodox Church, the Bright God Church. The Battle Era of Thistles and Thorns. Looking at the title page, it seems like it's about a comparatively major expedition during the ancient empire era. The target was the land of Thorns in the southwestern part of the current Western Peninsula. The historical biography of the great emperor Camelot's conquest, the historical biography of the ancient empire's first great emperor, and how the empire was founded. Feudal Kings 30 Politics XXX, the ancient language of the empire in the book title is already incomprehensible. God, this is probably related to the age of the feudal kings before the ancient empire. The origins of the ancient orc. This seems easy to understand even though the entire book is written in the ancient language of the empire. The disaster of Theron Karen. There is another line of names on the cover. It is not written in the common language, but it is not really written in another system of the empire's ancient language either. I do not know what book this is. The Records of the Temple. Complete collection of knights. This book seems to be narrating the history of knights during their age of glory. It starts from the age of feudal kings to the era of the empire. The Story of the Great Dragon. Don't know whether this is a work of fiction or a serious record. XXX, Iron Blood King and Mead. This is another title I cannot make out. The Directory of the 10 Knights of Past Empire Dynasties. There seems to be more books written in the common language starting from this row of bookshelves. Dragon Kiss Academy, Commemorative Album of Year 612, this entire book is incomprehensible to me. Males and females, this actually has illustrations, I better put it back. Chronicles of Dragon Spear, what the hell? Thales became increasingly excited and he even forgot about his original purpose to find a way out, or find any trace of magic. It was as if he went back to his past life, through fragments of his memory, like discovering a huge amount of excellent quality documents in a database. This was probably the Heroic Spirit Palace Library, or the Walton Family Library. When he was in Constellation, he constantly had no time to acquire a sufficient amount of knowledge. Also, in Constellation, relatively precious books were almost always treasured and amassed in the Jadestar Grand Library, which was established by royalty. Thales walked past another row of bookshelves. It seemed like a row of bookshelves had been removed from this spot and it was replaced with a row of long, metallic cabinets. The top of the cabinets were covered in transparent glass and crystal dropboard that allowed light to transmit. Hence, the object conserved inside could be seen. This is. Borrowing the reflected light from the mysterious gem above his head, Thales stared surprisingly at an ancient scroll inside the glass cabinet. He looked at the top of the document and saw a dragon spear symbol as well as a 9-pointed star symbol on either side. Jadestar. Thales' gaze could not hide his curiosity and excitement. This ancient document was entirely written in the ancient language of the Empire, and the writer had extremely profound penmanship as well as artistic attainments. The classic calligraphy characters were beautifully written and pleasant to read. However, it was different from what Thales had learned from Gilbert in Mindy's Hall. That one was ancient and awkward sounding, with complicated wordings as well as a peculiar writing style. On this particular document, the ancient language of the Empire seemed simple and straightforward. It was easy to understand as it was mixed with grammar and words of the current common language. Thales had crammed everything in 1 month when he was learning the ancient language, so it was a surprise that he still managed to understand the document. It was obviously from the era after the ancient empire crumbled. It was an era when the ancient language began to be influenced by the common language, which soon infiltrated and replaced it. Thales pressed his face against the glass cabinet and he managed to identify the contents of the yellowing scroll. He took some time to get used to it at first, but it became smoother as he got towards the end. 1530 years after the establishment of the empire. 11 years after the year of Errol. In the name of the great holy sun. Under the witness of the Sunset Temple. In the longhouse belonging to the suzerain of Cold Castle, this treaty was established together by the Honorable King of Extit, Rikaru Extit, and the Honorable King of Constellation, Tormund Jadistar. As such, they should abide by this oath. The oath of King Rikaru. In the name of the Holy Sun, I take my oath. I, along with every loyal Northlander who follows me, regardless of men, women, the elderly, children, nobles, commoners, suzerains, or soldiers, will not intervene in the war involving King Tormund and his followers in the ancient chauvinistic land as well as the Great Desert, will not investigate and hold King Tormund responsible for his behavior towards the Olsius family, will recognize the fair governance and rights that King Tormund as well as his followers have in the ancient chauvinistic land, the land of South Coast, the hills of Green Heart and the lands they have already obtained. We will recognize the corresponding actions they take towards the south and the west to ensure their survival, defend their people, and protect their territory. This includes but is not limited to military actions. Will acknowledge Cold Castle as the boundary of King Tormund and his followers' territory. The south shall belong to him, and the north shall be under my rule. Will display tolerance and sincerity towards King Tormund and his followers, instead of hatred and doubt to ensure that King Tormund and his followers find the greatest amount of fairness as well as equality on the land where the Northlanders live. These words and this oath shall be effective from the day it is established, until the end of my life and King Tormund's. 2. The Oath of King Tormund. In the name of the Holy Sun, I take my oath. I, along with every loyal citizen of the Empire who follows me, regardless of men, women, the elderly, children, nobles, commoners, suzerains, or soldiers, will give up the claim and pursuit of the northern plains and the surrounding land of the pine forest. Will treat the remaining nobles in the land of the original ancient chauvinistic province with leniency, retain their rights and cease investigation on the Olsius family who are taking cover in the original Northland province of the Empire. Will respect King Rikaru and his followers' rights to further acquire territories, people and properties in the original territory of the Empire without going against our aspirations and benefits on the following basis. King Rikaru and his followers in the original Northland province of the Empire as well as the original West Billow province of the Empire have rights to the lands that they have already obtained accordingly. Acknowledge that Cold Castle located in the original northern province of the Empire will serve as the boundary between the two sides. Our side recognizes that, to the north, King Rikaru and his followers have corresponding handling rights to the original territories of the Empire, its people and properties. Will treat every single Northlander and Rudalian in the territory with kindness in the present, the past and the future. We will treat them like citizens of the Empire, respecting and acknowledging the presence and authority of King Rikaru as well as his followers within their borders as equal to the past nobles of the Empire. These words and this oath shall be effective from the day it is established, until the end of my life and King Rikaru's. Here are the witnesses present. Head Ritual Master, Kandas and Vice Ritual Master, Rutgers. Queen Chlorisis Nerman Da'ala Dorsal and the Advisor of the Soul Tower, Brienne Qualls Tabark. Suzerain Lassa Trentida, Suzerain Scott Stustel. Count Leinster Covendier, Count Cooper Cullen. Writer, Viscount Halva Carabaean. Year 11 of the Holy Sun's Calendar of Eradication, afternoon of the 29th of January. The appendices relevant to the treaty are as follows. God. Thales was entranced as he read the document, but he was also incomparably shocked. This is King of Renaissance, Tormund Jadistar and King of Dragon Knight, Rikaru Extit. The treaty, that they agreed to and signed over 600 years ago. Thales pondered over the main text of the treaty and in his heart, he received the confirmation he needed. This is a peace treaty to a ceasefire between Constellation and Extit, it's a treaty of mutual non-intervention. Right at this moment, he moved to the space between the second and third glass cabinet. The light began to dim. And in his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of the empty space between the two glass cabinets. There seemed to be something black moving over there. Thales turned his head around. And on the ground a few meters away from him, a person suddenly appeared. Arg. Thales was truly frightened and he slammed his back against the glass cabinet. Thud. A pale-faced Thales took several steps back and grabbed the leg of the glass cabinet with great effort to maintain his balance. The figure, who suddenly appeared, seemed to be frightened too as he or she lay on the floor. The other party could be seen taking a deep breath and a step backwards. Thales patted his chest to calm his heart, which was frantically beating. After seeing that it was truly a person before him, he felt relieved. Thales was still panting when opened his mouth to speak. However, the other party finally decided to lift her head. Thales was momentarily stunned by this. The person was very petite, very short and very tiny. To be precise, it was a girl with curly, platinum hair. She was wearing a long, gray dress and she had a frightened look on her face. She appeared to be only about 8 or 9 years old. Thales glanced to his left and right in confusion. There is no one on either side. But why is there a young girl here? Also, why is it a young girl? Thales was reminded of the last, young girl, he accidentally saw beside a coffin and he recalled the supernatural folklore Nicholas had told him about heroic spirit Palace. So, he was somewhat scared. He gulped and stared at her intently. The girl's gray dress was covered in dust and she was lying flat on her stomach above a large, thick book, which was almost a meter wide. Her elbows were propped on the pages of either side and her face was almost stuck on the book. She was actually reading. The young girl lifted her head and her face was visibly covered in dust as well as stains. Her platinum hair was stuck against her forehead and her frightened face revealed a sign of confusion. At the next second, she peered in Thales' direction with a dazed look on her face as she squinted her eyes. She appeared suspicious of him and vigilant, like an amphibian. She turned full circle. But her eyes were empty and her eyeballs seemed lifeless, they were not focused on Thales. Under the light, she actually did not see Thales. She did not see Thales. The other party sniffed the air forcefully as though she smelled something. A shudder ran through Thales' heart upon seeing this. Could it be? A weird fragment of memory surfaced in his mind. My model isn't done yet, what have you dragged me out to see again today? Hiya, you can rest assured, big bookworm. You'll definitely not be afraid of this. This fictional film is about a group of people going on an underground scientific exploration. Scientific exploration, what's the title? Is it called The Descent? Or Decline? Oh, this is actually an adventure film, but what's the matter with the girls? They're going on an exploration as part of a psychological treatment. Yes, why would I harm you? You'll know when you continue watching. Why are you turning off the light at this time? Don't tell me you want me to look at your fluorescent wristwatch, what the hell? What on earth is this thing? Let me go, I don't want to watch it anymore. Ah. Thales gulped again. The girl looked like she wanted to get a clearer picture of where Thales was. The creepy girl with squinted eyes. Those with squinted eyes are all monsters. This was a memory in his head from an unknown time. The little girl with squinted eyes slowly extended her neck and reached out. She moved her legs slowly, bit by bit. And she crawled towards Thales. 1 step. 2 steps. The creepy little girl suddenly stopped crawling and turned in his direction once again, scrutinizing the situation for a full 3 seconds. Thales felt his heart thumping. In an ancient room piled up with dust. In an exhibition hall of antiques. The young girl who could not see was squinting her eyes and standing on all fours. She then crawled over like an amphibian. Thales felt a chill going down his spine and he kept repeating the same thing in his heart. Oh, this can't be real. A young girl, who was actually several hundred years old crawling out from a coffin was enough. He suddenly came to his sense and realized that he was in Dragon Cloud City. He was in a vacant room, next to the cabinet containing Reikaru's treaty from a long time ago. When he thought of this, his legs suddenly gave out and he bumped into the leg of the glass cabinet. The young girl with squinted eyes was immediately alerted and she moved her head in a flash. Her expression was sinister. Thales could feel his heart freeze. In the blink of an eye, she faced Thales' direction and opened her mouth. But the scary scene he had been imagining did not appear. Instead, he heard the clear and crisp voice of a child. Thales was momentarily stunned. The little girl was clearly astonished and she kept shaking her head. She's a living person. It's good that she's a living person. Thales exhaled a puff of air and patted his chest. But why can't this living person see me? He would soon find out why. The young girl extended her hand and fumbled around the area next to the open book beneath her. Then, the young girl swept away the hair covering her forehead. This made her originally dirty face appear even darker. She then squinted her eyes and grabbed a pair of round glasses with a black frame. She wore the glasses right after that and lifted her head. This time, her eyes were finally fully opened. She had a pair of dark green eyes. Thales opened his mouth, but he did not know what to say. And so, in Heroic Spirit Palace, in the gap between thick, closely packed bookshelves, next to a glass cabinet storing the treaty between 2 legendary kings. A young girl with platinum hair and a dirty face, wearing thick, black, round glasses lay foolishly on the floor as she stared blankly at Thales, who was sitting on the ground with his back against the glass cabinet. Who are you? Chapter 133 Hunt and Chase. Cohen and Miranda trod on the ground covered with mud and melted snow. In contrast to the neat and sophisticated urban structure of Eternal Star City, the streets of Dragon Cloud City appeared cluttered and unplanned during the winter, with inconsistent sizes and layouts of the roadways. Houses along both sides of the streets seemed to be piled on top of each other. Sharp spikes of ice formed under the eaves and lumps of snow were heaped around the shops, signs. In spite of that, Cohen thought that the meticulous construct of Eternal Star City gave off a grim, chilling vibe, whereas Dragon Cloud City had a hint of orderliness amid its apparent chaos. His hunch was confirmed when the Northlanders were seen traveling through streets as well as alleys, following their daily routines with ease and familiarity. This was particularly visible in the borough's many winding paths. The Armor District was one of these examples. Loud, Northlandic voices echoed in the chilly air, accompanied by hearty laughter and curses. Bundled up in thick winter clothing, the Northland men hurried back and forth with loads of goods. The women, with baskets hanging from or clasped in their arms, occasionally stopped by to converse with folks from all walks of life, haggling over prices of goods with ferocity and aggression that could match the men's as children scuttled down the street in groups. This seeming state of disorderliness that Northland uniquely possessed reminded Cohen of the Great Desert, back on the western frontlines in the Blade Fang's Dune military camp, a vile, lawless place where soldiers, crooks, vermin, thugs, fugitives, mercenaries, and adventurers gathered. Unlike the camp, the gloom of animosity and violence were absent in the chaotic Northland. Instead, there was brightness, a sense of security, the hustle and bustle of the market, and perfect harmony. Miranda Arund was someone accustomed to the solemnity of the Tower of Eradication and the systematicity of Constellation. She could merely frown at the Northlanders. Their lifestyle and mannerisms made her feel rather uneasy. A troop of soldiers were marching down the street, heading their way. The group was headed by a leader, who greeted the civilians around them. "That's a disciplinary officer," Cohen whispered. "There aren't many visitors in the Armor District, so naturally we'll draw attention. Let's find somewhere to hide." Miranda nodded, turning on her heel, and the two slipped into a small alleyway between two houses. They then sought for their target amid the confined spaces. Cohen's short-lived career as a police officer had provided him with experience of patrolling and performing searches in the cities. He traced and moved along the walls, looking for a possible hiding place. Miranda surveyed the empty alleyway, listening hubbub of the street in the distance. "Where's the place you told us about?" She frowned. "It's probably near," Cohen mumbled as he groped the walls along his path. "What we ought to do now, is determine which one of these houses has." All of a sudden, the two of them froze. They turned around. There was a man in the alleyway, who was dawdling in their direction. Cohen seemed slightly puzzled, whereas Miranda was alarmed. The man was a tanned, young Northlander with a sullen look, and he was dressed in a filthy, ragged robe. Just an ordinary pauper in the city. The young man, as if traumatized or overwhelmed by grief, kept on walking in a daze, turning a blind eye to them. Cohen and Miranda shared a glance and moved aside, clearing a path for the man. He walked through the space between the two, sauntering past them. However, Miranda turned around and called out to him, much to Cohen's confusion. "Hey, you." The young pauper stopped in his tracks and turned to face them with a baffled expression. "What are you doing sneaking around?" "Planning to kill someone," said Miranda slowly. Her eyes were narrowed. "What?" The young man was perplexed. "Kill what?" Cohen furrowed his eyebrows. Miranda had never acted recklessly before. There was a sharp glint in Miranda's eyes as she jutted out her chin and arched her eyebrows. "If that's not what you are up to, why would you hide that sword by your waist underneath your robe? And fake the way you walk?" The young man's expression stiffened. Cohen held his breath for a split second. He glanced at the man's waist, but there was no telltale bulge of a concealed weapon. "I don't understand. What does my sword have anything to do with you?" Completely baffled, the young man protested. Miranda cut him off. "Just drop the act." Miranda touched the sword handle by her waist and her expression darkened. "Where I was for the past 3 years, I had to deal with dozens of spies, scouts and smugglers sneaking across the border every day." The man's vacuous eyes began to sharpen. Getting the hint, Cohen shifted himself to the other end of the alley, blocking the man's path from behind. The narrow passage was barricaded on both sides and there was no way he could escape. "Do you know what you have in common with those people?" said the daughter of the Arund family as she shook her head sarcastically. "The answer is, every single one of you believes that you're good at hiding things." The young man slowly straightened up and his expression turned cold. Miranda sighed. They too thought that no one could see through them as long as they appeared calm. Cohen chuckled lightly. "Gosh, Miranda's observation skills, she'll be a better police officer than me. With a little more effort, she can even get into the kingdom's secret intelligence department." His heart sank as he thought of the Secret Service and Raphael. "Now, remain calm, mister," he warned as he reached for his sword. We just want to figure something out, besides, it's never a good idea to start a fight in a small alley like this. Such a shame, the young man sighed regretfully. If only I had one more second to get to the right spot. Then, the fight broke out. With a swoosh, the man swung his right elbow backwards like an arrow, aiming for the top of Cohen's head. His sudden attack caught Cohen by surprise. But Cohen remained composed and responded with a counterattack. His left arm shot up and he fended off the elbow strike with a swipe. Thwack! It was the sound of clashing blows. The two men felt a jolt and the bones in their forearms trembled. Unmoved, the blond officer stretched his right hand out and prepared to seize his opponent's upper arm. At the very next moment, however, the young man swung his right hand, slamming it against the side of Cohen's left arm. With a hefty shove, he gained momentum from his opponent and bounced off him. The elbow strike earlier was a diversion. Cohen narrowed his eyes and realized the real target was Miranda. The young man leapt towards her. With his right leg, he aimed a full-speed kick at the dark-haired swordswoman. Miranda dodged it, her back leaning against the wall. Thus, she managed to evade the attack. She lifted her left leg and took a stride forward, on the tip of her toes, a move that seemed so unmotivated and random. But she was in fact aiming at the attacker's right leg. Astonished, the young man lost his balance. He quickly held on to the wall with his left arm and steadied himself just as Cohen's iron fist rammed into his back with a swish. Every inch of the young man's muscles shook. He turned around and clenched his teeth. Pow! The men's fists clashed midair. Nonetheless, Cohen, being the one who took the offensive, managed to gain the upper hand. The young man, having to ward off his strike, stumbled backwards. Meanwhile, Miranda shot her hand towards the ladder, directing her attack at his neck. But the young man spun around, revealing a sword hilt with a brass pommel strapped to his waist underneath the robe. Fueled by an energy from within, he gained the strength to dodge Miranda's vicious hand strike. With his short and flexible hand, he pulled his hand and a half-sword out of its sheath, swooping it down on Cohen. The confined space of the alleyway meant that Cohen's long and sizable saber was at a disadvantage. He could only guard against the attack with half of his saber drawn out of its sheath. Clank! A look of disbelief appeared on Cohen's face. Charging at him from the opponent's sword was a wave of force that Cohen deemed familiar. Driven by instinct, Cohen summoned the power of eradication. Glory of the stars shone bright from within him and he began to expel the vile force. In the meantime, the strength of his arm was given a boost, and with a sudden jolt of his saber, the hand and a half-sword was shaken off. Despite being seemingly astounded by Cohen's composure and decisiveness at such a critical moment, the young man could not afford to hesitate after his missed strike. Miranda's footsteps were closing in on him from behind. He leapt into the air, then stomped on both sides of the wall. He somersaulted over Cohen's head, landed far behind him, and skidded out of the alley. He's running away. Gritting his teeth, Cohen swung his right arm and shook off the tingling, numbing sensation inflicted by the dark energy. He raced after the man. Is that him? Miranda started to run as well, following closely behind Cohen. The young man turned abruptly into another alley, going deeper into the heart of the borough. I swear on my life. Cohen, swayed by his momentum while making the swift turn, ran into a wall. Unaffected, he continued his pursuit of the man at full speed as he shouted, "That's the power of eradication. Don't forget about our mission," Miranda said coldly from far behind. She hopped over to a window at the corner of the alley. With her right hand latched on to the windowsill, she made the turn in a swing. She landed, rolled across the ground, got to her feet, and sped forward within mere seconds. She reminded her companion, "We are here to investigate, not look for a fight. The disciplinary officer is still on patrol." In the alleyway, far ahead of the young man, an earthen wall about the height of two men came into view. Seemingly familiar with the layout of the backstreets, the man sprung into the air when the obstacle was still a dozen feet away. He stepped on the wall to his left, then the one to his right. And with that, he bounded over the wall like a spider. Despite Cohen's great height, his agility rivaled that of the best scouts. He leapt forward, grasping the wall with his forearms. Cohen's face turned crimson as he pulled himself upwards with the monstrous might of his forearms, like a giant, black-headed spider monkey. He managed to roll over the wall and land on his feet, after which he resumed his chase. Watch out, it's a trap. Miranda tipped over to the wall on her right, a rush of pulsing energy bubbled inside her. He's waiting on the other side. Unlike the young man, whose tactic was to build up his speed with the aid of the walls on both sides, the nimble-footed Miranda only paced along the right wall, tilting her body. After 6 light steps, she rose into the air and glided over the obstacle effortlessly. Trap or not, we've got to get him. Gnashing his teeth, Cohen scowled as he struggled to save his breath. We just have to intercept him. Land a blow on the back of his skull. It's risk-free, subtle, and effective. The young man scurried up 3 flights of stairs with his shoulders hunched. He moved past 2 startled Northlanders and turned into an alley. Cohen, hurrying behind, climbed the stairs in long strides. He muttered his apology as he elbowed past the Northlanders and entered the alleyway as well. Damn it, this fellow sure can run. I'll keep my eyes on him. Cohen felt his stamina draining. Intercept him. Miranda did not reply, but she did not go after them either. Once she reached the top of the stairway, the power of Pegasus music erupted within her and she rose up into the air. It's time to take a shortcut. The two Northlanders watched in awe as Miranda hovered over them and clung onto a drying rack, swinging herself into the sky. She then held on to a windowsill about the height of a 3-story building, and with some leverage from her feet, she flipped onto the roof. Without catching a breath, she darted from one roof to the other, heading towards the two men, who were racing along the alley's twists and turns. Hounded by Cohen, the young man left the backstreets and sped into an open space between 3 houses. It was then that Miranda soared into the sky. She grabbed the handle of her sword, knowing that she would land on the open space, about 2 meters before the young man. However, her faultless interception was followed by a mishap. The moment Miranda flew off the roof, she felt a chill from head to toe. A premonition of imminent danger washed over her. Out of instinct, she unsheathed her sword. With her upper body turned and her arm outstretched, she stabbed the surface beneath her. The tip of her sword sank into the roof behind her and brought her to a halt. In that instant, the young man and Cohen disappeared into another alleyway. Miranda hung from the sword, grasping it with one hand. Her legs swung forward due to inertia and as her feet swept up into the air, a sword flashed across the corner of her eye. It was only inches away from her boot. Miranda broke out in a cold sweat. Thank goodness, I stopped just in time. Or else. She was eyeing the glint of the sword, which then alighted alongside its owner to the open space. The owner of the sword straightened himself up. He was a middle-aged man with short hair. Miranda pressed herself against the roof and yanked her sword out. She hopped down from the roof and landed in front of him. She glared at the man with a dark look on her face and found herself in the presence of an elite among the super class or even higher. Miranda stood up, catching her breath. Disaster sword, we meet again. The man said nothing. Instead, he merely stared at her. His eyes were vacant as though he was a corpse. So, this is the trap you've set up. Miranda studied her opponent, scanning for clues and useful information about him. But, why are there only 2 of you? You must have great faith in yourselves. The man shook his head calmly. Disaster sword, it's not the first time I've heard it, but being called by that name, how ironic. He turned and whipped out a strange sword. It was supposedly an ordinary longsword, except its ridge was hollowed out. The slot stretched from the middle of the blade to a few inches before its tip, taking up about 1/3 of the sword's length. Miranda squinted her eyes. It was common to notch a groove like fuller, or blood gutter, on a sword. This indentation, despite its name, was not made for the purpose of blood draining, but only to lessen the weight of the weapon. Normally, a sword was fullered from the foot to the middle of the blade. However, there was something odd about the man's sword. First of all, although the completely hollowed-out ridge would significantly lighten the weapon, it would surely damage the quality of the blade. Secondly, the empty slot was situated between the middle part of the blade and the tip, suggesting that it may be a literal blood gutter, made to drain its victim's blood. The skill of the swordsmith who forged the weapon in question was undoubtedly outstanding. Miranda concluded that among the swordsmiths in the Tower of Eradication in the elven or dwarf community, only a few were capable of such a feat. Not bad, the man said with a hoarse voice. You've traveled a long way from Constellation. A huge progress for the Tower of Eradication as it seems. They know we are Constellations. Miranda felt a ping of anxiety. How did we give ourselves away? Perhaps it is as Caslin said. In the eyes of an expert, there's nothing we can hide. So, what could be the reason for you to work for a certain Archduke of Extit? Miranda did not see the need to draw her weapon at this point. Instead, she attempted to collect more intel. As the Fortress Flower mandated, it was the most crucial principle in their line work: know thyself, know thy enemy. You'd go as far as assassinating the Prince of Constellation, for them. What could you possibly get from this? She asked again. Other than conquering the Tower of Eradication, what is the point of this? Extit's throne, or Constellations, or perhaps you would like to start a war between them. Our aim. The man seemed unperturbed. Thrones, a war. His cold voice reeked of total contempt. Such short-sighted plans would never cross our minds. The Tower of Eradication was never part of our original plan. That just happened by chance. Miranda scowled. If not for the thrones or war, what drove them to lurk about the Black Sand region and attempt to assassinate the prince with the power of the mystic gun? It's not always for justice then. Looks like you've been here for quite some time. Miranda was slightly disheartened, but she tried to probe him using a different approach. After all, you've managed to infiltrate the firearms black market in Dragon Cloud City as well as the mystic gun unit in Black Sand region. Now that you're exposed, why don't you test them out on us? Mystic gun. The man lifted his sword casually, not bothered by what Miranda had said. As a sword fighter, it is best to focus on your primary weapon, despite how powerful guns are. Miranda huffed. Damn it. His lips are sealed tight. Let's get this over with. We stem from the same roots, but we are destined for mutual annihilation, said the man calmly. We have 5 minutes to settle this before the disciplinary officer and his troop get here. Looks like there's nothing I can coax out of him. Miranda took a deep breath as she rotated her wrist. She then stooped down a little and get into position. Unless I capture him alive. Or perhaps kill him. The two of them slowly approached one another. Miranda let go of her senses, and Pegasus music was unleashed. Miranda kept herself informed by feeling the rhythm of her opponent's combat style, just like her countless sword fights before this. What came next, however, was a flicker of the sword. Miranda was filled with panic and terror. Whoa! There was no rhythm in his movement, nothing she could feel. Because the man's sword, to Miranda's dismay, had advanced 5 feet from where he was. And before she even realized, it was piercing the left side of her chest. Cohen, still in pursuit of the enemy, noticed that the young man had stopped running after another turn around the corner. He stomped the ground beneath him repeatedly and came to a halt. He held onto his sword, regulating his breath at the same time. As it appears, the young man smirked, the swordsmen of the Tower of Eradication are overrated. Miranda did not follow them. It was then that Cohen felt a spasm of dread. Was she intercepted by someone else? Cohen took a deep breath and immediately calmed himself down. Looks like it was their plan to separate us. I see. Cohen glowered at the young man who seemed relaxed. You were expecting us. A supra-class elite. And to top it off, he's so young. Of course, the young man chuckled, shaking his head. Did you think you could find us on your own? We wanted to be found. Cohen frowned. He reached for the sword by his waist. That Far Easterner, GU sold us out. Damn this narrow alley. It makes it hard to draw out my sword. Hardly the case. We paid him beforehand. The young man slowly pulled out his hand and a half sword. We had an agreement, if someone came to him for information about us. He then shrugged, giving Cohen a, just so that you know, look. Really, Cohen kept an eye on every movement the enemy made. We paid him as well, he said, with an air of restraint. Is that true? Then, it must have been the tip you offered. The young man grinned and took a step forward, raising the sword in his hand. It wasn't enough. Cohen let out a mirthless laugh as he got ready for a fight. This space is too cramped. Sword movements like the left to right hack and diagonal slash will be difficult to perform. It's time to employ the sword style I learned from one of the Scions, Claudier. Let's hope it's still fresh in my memory. Is this then, the first contact? The young man snorted, inching towards Cohen, between the descendants of the inner tower and outer tower in 40 years. Certainly not, the latter shot back, recalling a fight he once had as well as the swordsman in red and black in Red Street Market. I ran into a friend of yours back in Constellation a month or two ago, he and I are the lucky bearers of such an honor. The young man's eyes turned grim. He stopped in his tracks and his smile faded. You are the person who killed Groudon, he said. I won't take full credit for that. Cohen shuffled forward with caution. But, I'll take half of it, perhaps, not even half. Their eyes met. Do you know, the young man said meaningfully, taking a step to the left, the Tower of Eradication is the rightful successor of the Temple of Knights. During the Battle of Eradication, it is, other than a handful of warriors, the strongest and most noble existence fighting for the survival of humanity. After the war, its members bore the duty of guarding humans against the mystics, and they have devoted themselves to the continuity as well as development of the power of eradication. Are you giving me a lesson on our history? Cohen scoffed at him. This, coming from you, the traitors. Traitors, the young man tittered, shaking his head. Do you even know how we defeated the mystics back then? His stare hardened. Those never-aging, indestructible, imperishable entities. Well, they may have been immortal beings, but they also had a deadly weakness, which made them vulnerable to attacks aimed at their Achilles heel. Cohen gradually uncovered the best spot to launch a strike. Warriors with legendary anti-mystic equipment and mystic-resistant powers of eradication battled against these foes. They were ready to die for their cause, Cohen went on. The civilians may not know about that, but we do. PFF, legendary anti-mystic equipment, mystic-resistant powers. The young man laughed and his expression darkened. No, you don't know a thing. You have been fed with shameless lies. Ordinary power of eradication could barely compete with mystic energy, he said grimly. Anti-mystic equipment, before those were even invented, what do you think we relied on to fight against those immortal beings to survive? HMPH, Cohen's glare sharpened. He hardly cared about what the young man had to say. Instead, he was actively seeking and targeting his opponent's weak points. The last disaster sword I bumped into was not as talkative as you. In response, the young man shifted his feet and threw his hand and a half sword straight at Cohen. A vicious surge of the power of eradication exploded within the young man, and the tip of his sword glistened. Not being able to tell the intended direction of the sword, Cohen gnashed his teeth. What's the nature of the enemy's power? Changing the course of the flying sword, muddling one's senses, or boosting the speed of the weapon? Goddamn it. Clank. On the verge of peril, Cohen went with his battle instincts and parried the blow. The sword collided with his saber and the tip of the blade was only 2 inches away from his throat. His enemy's power was above average. Compared to that of the swordsman back in Red Street Market, this man was similarly vicious, but he had the added ability to inflict a numbing, painful sensation. It gradually set upon Cohen's saber and arm, threatening to crush him. Chapter 134 Little Rascal and Alex 1. Thales sat on the floor, feeling puzzled. He was staring at the girl, whose face was covered with dust. She wore a pair of glasses and was staring right back at him. I was just looking for someone to ask for directions to the Hall of Heroes. He paused for a second, deciding to retain information regarding his identity. He faked a grin. I just came back to Heroic Spirit Palace earlier today. Oh, the girl, who was lying on her stomach, flinched and hummed timidly. She adjusted her dusty, black round glasses on her nose. I thought no one would be here. Those cumbersome glasses were obviously too big for her. They were barely held up by the girl's ears. She looked hilarious with them on her small, grubby face. Then, may I know who you are? Thales stood up, beating the dust off himself. He smiled at her in a friendly manner. I work here, the little girl stuttered, overwhelmed with doubt and hesitation. She took a cautious peek at Thales and she appeared a little frightened. The girl was like a tiny squirrel, trying to evade a falcon and hiding in a tree's hollow, shivering in fear. I might have heard from someone in the scullery that many people will visit Heroic Spirit Palace these days. Thales frowned. Work here? The scullery? Could she be? A thought fleeted across his mind. According to a certain delusional teenage girl, if young children randomly surfaced in a strange palace and wandered around an unsupervised area, no matter how dowdy they dressed, or how odd their behaviors were, Thales sneaked a peek at the platinum-haired girl. Their identities were not hard to guess. You're from a noble family. Thales narrowed his eyes, peering at the scrawny girl, who struggled to get to her feet. Hearing him, the girl was startled. Bingo, Thales nodded to himself. That's a typical plot development. However, the next moment, the girl looked down at her feet nervously and shook her head. Huh. Thales patted off the dust on his arms, scowling. Isn't this how it should play out? A prince loiters around in the Heroic Spirit Palace, gets lost and bumps into a foreign princess. Their encounter is then followed by a string of strange occurrences and all sorts of flirtations. Wait a minute. Thales glanced at the books on the ground, then at her glasses. This girl was literate and even understood the ancient language of the Empire. If she was not of royal blood, she would not have had the chance to access these materials and knowledge. Plus, she would not have severe short-sightedness, much less be able to walk around Heroic Spirit Palace. Thales smiled again. Are you a Walton, King Nuvin's, granddaughter or grandniece? Surprisingly, the girl was terrified. She waved her arms and shook her head. No, I'm just a servant. Ordered to look for something here. Thales' frown deepened. No. As the girl whipped her head, her oversized glasses slid down and fell off her nose. Alarmed, she let out a scream and squinted, attempting to catch the glasses. Her arms flailed as she grabbed the air. Due to her short-sightedness, her waving hands hit the glasses in her panic, and they swooshed towards Thales as a result. Startled, Thales raised his hands out of instinct and grabbed the girl's glasses, which was flying straight into his arms. Hey, the corner of his lips turned upwards, looks like my reflexes have improved. The glasses. The girl kneeled down. Her eyes were squeezed into narrow slits as she groped the floor blindly. My glasses. Don't panic, it's with me. Thales comforted her while being driven by curiosity at the same time. He examined the black round glasses in his hands. The damaged frame appeared to be made out of metal, which explained its weight. The thick lenses were cracked and covered in dust. Thales was uncertain how advanced the knowledge and facilities of optometry were in this universe. The frame was not exactly round, but rather square with rounded edges. It reminded him of a certain infamous individual. Were it to benefit my country, one. Cough, cough. Thales shook off the silly recollection. Excuse me, the little girl, disheartened by the loss of her corrective glasses and vision, lay on the floor with a blank expression. Her hands were groping the floor and inching forward in Thales' direction. Don't move. Thales approached the poor squinting child, who was struggling to see what was before her, and sighed. He squatted down in front of her, and as her hand touched his knees by accident, it shrank away immediately. Don't be afraid, Thales tried to sound kind and gentle. It's all right. He reached out and brushed aside her platinum, shoulder-length hair, revealing her grimy left ear in the process. His hand felt her slight tremble. The girl flinched a little and her breath deepened. The prince unfolded the glasses and carefully positioned them on her ears. With a light press, he secured the nose pads to her tiny nose bridge. Smiling, Thales let go of her and watched as the girl's eyes slowly widened behind the lenses. She gaped at the strange boy standing before her. Through the dirt-smeared lenses, Thales noticed how clear and bright her green eyes were up close. Be careful, Thales said, still smiling. And you should get a new pair of glasses. This one's too big for you. All of a sudden, the girl regained her composure and got on her feet. She propped up her glasses and looked up at Thales in a daze. She was no longer shivering. The primitive hostility she exhibited earlier had also waned significantly. So, you're really just a servant? Thales raised an eyebrow and shrugged. He decided not to pursue the matter. The little girl pursed her lips and nodded. Thales stared at her and sighed once again. In that case, can you give me the directions to the Hall of Heroes? The girl lifted her arm. Walk out from here, go straight, turn right, turn left, go downstairs, turn right. Her instructions caused Thales to become flummoxed. Stop, Thales snapped. He sighed and said, never mind. I better figure it out on my own. The little girl lowered her head pitifully. I'm sorry. No, it's not your fault. It's on me. I have no sense of direction. Wait a minute. Just as Thales was preparing to leave, he noticed what lay underneath the girl's torso. You're reading. His facial expression turned grim. What book is that? He spotted the page she was on. His heart sank. This. The girl pulled out the hefty book with a glum look and closed the book, showing Thales the front cover. Thales helped her carry the book. That's The Dawn of Heroes. In an instant, the girl's eyes glimmered behind her thick lenses, and her utterances became fluent and full of confidence. It tells the stories of a few human leaders during the Battle of Eradication. The stories are written by an elf named Cahill Yarrow. Thales gawked at the girl as her timidity dissolved into crazed enthusiasm. This kid. Wait, let's get back to the matter at hand. The Battle of Eradication, huh? Thales took a deep breath. Lots of books recount this event, where unnamed monsters aided by traitors of humanity started the war. It also recounts how our people fought back. His stare sharpened. What's so special about this one? It probably also talks about the enemy's invincibility, the ordeal of war, the sacrifices we made, and the unexpected victory in the end, just like the Battle of Eradication Chronicles. You've read the Battle of Eradication Chronicles. I heard that it went out of print. It was written by someone from the Empire. You can only find it in Constellation's archives in the south. The girl's eyes lit up. Her lips curled and a dimple appeared on her left cheek. As for this book, it touches on lots and lots of interesting things. Thales seemed intrigued. The girl's eyes were brimming with passion and excitement. Well, for instance, it states that at the dawn of the war, nations from the east to west were trapped in the endless conflict and they conspired against one another. Not even the Church of Holy Sun could resolve the internal strife, not until the apparition of the Holy Sun God eventually put an end to it. There's also a record of Prince Tormund, later the King of Renaissance, who made a controversial decision to cast the old feud aside. He enlisted the orcs, the barren bone people, the merfolk and many other immortal races to unite against the enemy's troops. This order ultimately led to discontent among his own people and he was stripped of his right to command. One record reveals that General Foy Dirible of Handball spent most of his time retreating rather than fighting during the war. Those who battled against the Mystic Army were Prince Shangzan and Senjum. General Foy Dirible, on the other hand, hid in the east for 6 years with his remaining troops. Surprisingly, through years of careful scheming and ambushing, the army grew stronger over time. And, the legendary Senjum, the king of mountains, reportedly used to be a prisoner of war, who was incarcerated in the capital of Triumph. The night before the war broke out, however, a suspicious individual barged into the prison and freed Senjum as well as his comrades. It's also said that during the most critical time of the war, someone unlocked the gateway to hell and made a pact with the 7 kings of hell. Thus, we were allied with the demons to fight against the calamities. Bombarded by a series of new information all at once, Thales kept his main objective in mind. He remained composed and asked, did the book mention where those monsters, the calamities, came from? They're known as the enemy of God. I don't know about that specifically. The little girl patted the book cover and blushed. The book says there's nothing that can defeat those monsters. Thales was burning with curiosity at this point. How did we win the war then? The little girl continued excitedly as though she did not hear the question. It says here in the book that in the beginning of the war, we never really stood a chance against those undefeatable monsters, even though their powers or abilities are never specified. The soldiers gave up their lives while the enemy continued to advance. They were hoping to buy a little more time, until the invention of a destructive weapon. The prince sighed. The girl pointed at one of the pages as her eyes gleamed. Then, an ally of the enemy switched allegiance. Thales' chest tightened. It was a group with similarly unbeatable power. And they joined our side. Translator's note. Were it to benefit my country I would lay down my life, what then is risk to me? Original quote. Guo li guo jia sheng si yi, chi yin huo fu bai ku ji is extracted from a poem written by Lin Zexu, courtesy name Yuanfu, a Chinese scholar official of the Qing dynasty best known for his role in the First Opium War of 1839–1842. This quote, then, was used again by Jiang Zemin, a retired Chinese politician who served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of China from 1989 to 2002 and the central character of Moha culture, an internet meme spoofing Jiang Zemin's behavior and past statements. Thales, certain infamous individual, refers to Jiang, who also wore black and thick glasses with a square frame, which was round at the edges. The English translation is taken from the official website of China's Central Compilation and Translation Bureau. Chapter 135 Little Rascal and Alex 2. Switched allegiance. Wait, a similarly unbeatable power that betrayed the calamities. In a daze, Thales gazed at the scruffy little girl before him, casting his mind back to a past event. He recalled that horrid night in Red Street Market, where Asda Sakern, the air mystic, stood with his back against the ruins of the chess room. Asda's words echoed in his ears. So that's written in this book. Thales took a deep breath. Does it specify who those people were? No, it doesn't. The girl shook her head and lifted her chin, revealing her grubby face. Her green eyes blinked beneath those thick lenses of hers. There's another book about politics, foundations of the state in theory and practice, Constellation and the Great Dragon. It also talks about this incident without being specific. Both books do not state the identity of the betrayers. Thales scowled. The 6th chapter, The Diplomatic Influences on the Constitution of the Kingdoms, touches on that. Eager to convince Thales, the little girl put down the heavy book and pointed at the rows of bookshelves behind him with her teensy finger. The book is in the 6th row from the entrance. It's on the 5th tier of the shelf on the left, right between the collected essays of Rudo Gangart, and the Book of the Final Battle, King of Wrath's Testament. Whoa, that's very precise. Thales averted his gaze from the tiered shelves, feeling astonished. Then, an idea hit him. You're familiar with all these books. Who, really, is this girl? Who else would have the opportunity to learn how to read, and be thoroughly familiar with books in the palace library? Is she really just a servant? I'm just, the girl seemed startled. She lowered her head nervously. I just read a lot of books. You've got a good memory, huh? Thales said, feeling doubtful as he scanned the huge library. Are you a librarian? The girl was stupefied. She then shook her head in a timid, but firm manner. I see. Thales shrugged. So, this is the Walton family's library? Sort of. The girl's eyes lit up and the dimple on her left cheek resurfaced. Allegedly, Queen Chlorosis loved to read. So after the war, King Rikaru scoured the whole region, the whole country, even the whole continent for all the books he could find. This is according to the collected mandates of the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City. Rikaru exed it. Most of the books there were published after the Battle of Eradication, before the nations began a large-scale cleansing, erasing any trace of magic. This was the reason why there were so many works written in the ancient language of the Empire, or in a dozen other languages, even those belonging to non-human races. Hence, despite the mass cleansing, the library likely owned more books on the calamity and magic than anywhere else. Thales wondered if the notable Jadastar Grand Library could rival this one. The little girl was particularly delighted when she spoke of books. She no longer seemed fearful and anxious. She went on to say, however, during Archduke Shalin's regime, Dragon Cloud City stopped scouting for works and adding to the collection. Now, it's been years since anyone last saw the Queen. Plus, the library's located in the corner of the palace, so it is always unfrequented. Wait a minute, Chlorosis. Thales had a delayed response. You mean, Rikaru's, Queen of the Sky? The female great dragon that married a human? Hearing that, the little girl panicked once more. Do not be disrespectful to the Queen. She shook her head and her glasses threatened to slip off again. Flummoxed, her hands shot up to both sides of her face, holding on to the frame. You must call her, the Queen, and address her by her first name. Thales was surprised by her reaction. Well, don't worry, it's not like the Queen can hear me. He peered at the girl's comical face, feeling amused. I'll figure out the etiquette sooner or later when I finally see her in person, he said coolly. Oh, no, if you indeed meet Her Highness, there's another set of rules. The girl shook her head again, pouting, and murmuring, the great dragons are noble and divine beings. They loathe rudeness and discourtesy. If mortals are lucky enough to meet one, they must bow down on one knee, state their full name, and only stand back up when the dragon asks them to. Or else, Thales was tickled. Or else, the great dragon will hate you. The girl with platinum hair and glasses glared at him with a stern look on her small grubby face. Thales could not help but snicker. Seeing the girl's furious and pitiable expression, he fought back a grin. Okay, if I meet Her Highness someday, I will do as you say. But, I thought Queen Chlorosis has not been sighted in 600 years. How would you know if the legend of the great dragon is real? The girl pulled a long face, but remained silent. Thales narrowed his eyes. If King Rikaru and his queen really did fight in the Battle of Eradication, there should at least be proof, like who she fought. An enemy like Asda. No, Her Highness is real. The girl was pissed. The evidence is right behind you, in that glass display cabinet. Thales turned around to look at the cabinet he passed by on his way there. In it was the signed agreement between Tormund and Rikaru. Year 11, Calendar of Eradication, Rikaru and Tormund, Exted Constellation Border Treaty. The girl approached the cabinet, still holding her glasses up with her hands. It was signed by the two rulers in a longhouse belonging to the suzerain of Cold Castle. It's the earliest agreement between the two kingdoms for mutual non-aggression and non-interference. The two superpowers were allowed to extend their influence and territory under said pre-agreement. Year 11, Rikaru and Tormund, Thales gave up on his attempt to repeat the title of the treaty. He frowned. It's a really long name. The appendix is even longer. Pouting, the girl pointed at the elongated cabinet. The paper is about 3 feet long. Queen Chloris' signature is right above the two kings. Thales reluctantly inched past the 3 cabinets containing the appendix of the first official agreement signed by the two kingdoms, and browsed through the text. This treaty included almost everything: land and the inhibitors around the border, hunting hours, religion, and diplomatic relationships between the suzerains. Thales' eyes began to water. He stopped before the last cabinet and found himself looking at a few signatures of varied styles, which clearly meant that they were signed by hand. Witnesses: Chloris Nerman Da'ala Dorsal from the far edge of the high sea. Look, the little girl pressed her face against the glass. This is the signature of the first queen. It was a bold and angular signature. Each letter was linked to one another in a sleek and instinctual manner. However, it was the signature next to it that captured Thales' attention. By Brienne Qualls Tabark of the Soul Tower. It's a similarly precise and elegant cursive writing, but... the Soul Tower. Thales thought of Raymond's words and kept this name in mind. Meanwhile, Tabark, one of the 6 great clans that govern Blade Edge Hill, the southwest region of the kingdom, with a blood-red crescent as their family emblem. Thales recalled the sight of an aloof, lissom silhouette back in the Hall of Stars. It was the handsome and dazzling young Duchess, Lyanna Tabark. He looked down and saw the signatures of the two kings. The High Contracting Party, the common elected king of Extit, the widely esteemed ruler of the Northlanders, and the suzerain of Dragon Cloud City. Rikaru Brust Extit. And the supreme king of Constellation, the descendant of the ancient empire's imperial family, and the suzerain of Eternal Star City. Tormund Camelot Carlos Jadestar. The signatures of the two rulers shared a similarity. They were awful. Hideous. Horribly hideous. Rikaru's handwriting was akin to that of a toddler who had just learned how to write. Stroke by stroke, it was created by tender, awkward tugs and pulls on the paper. It appeared to have been done very slowly for fear of making mistakes. Tormund's signature, on the other hand, was a string of hasty, messy, illegible cursive writing. It looked like the king was trying to hide the fact that he had horrible handwriting by attempting a cursive. Thales stared at his ancestor's tentacle-like, squiggly signature and automatically felt much better about his own handwriting after spending a month or so learning how to write. Noticing his attentive gaze, the girl started to feel slightly uneasy. She explained, King Rikaru's background has always been unknown to the public. Most people believe that he was a commoner, having very little opportunity to receive education, hence his handwriting, whereas King Tormund was illegitimate and was allegedly boycotted when he was young, so. Thales burst into laughter. As it seemed, the founding fathers of the two kingdoms were oafs who could not even write their own names properly. Considering the witnesses' neat and elegant signatures, Thales could imagine the two kings' hesitation and looks of shame when they held the pen. Perhaps, an instant connection and a mutual sympathy was forged between them after seeing each other's handwriting. In the meantime, something dawned on Thales. Tormund Camelot Carlos Jadestar. Tormund's full name. Despite the illegible handwriting, he managed to recognize the initial of each word. T. Tormund. C. Camelot. K. Carlos. J. Jadestar. Thales felt a jolt. The girl noticed an unusual change in his expression. She wiped the dirt from her face off the glass, and looked up at him. Is there something wrong? Meanwhile, a voice sounded from the distance. Little rascal, little rascal. Hearing the voice, the bespectacled girl became terrified and she began to tremble uncontrollably like a mouse running into a cat. Thales looked up, alarmed. It was a snappy, childish voice coming from behind the bookshelf. Why are you being so slow? Are you done? The voice became louder as its owner approached, eventually appearing before Thales and the bespectacled girl. It was a girl. She looked a little more than 10 years old and seemed to be one head taller than the scruffy little rascal. The girl had brunette hair, blue eyes and fine facial features. She was clothed in a stylish hand-sewn dress. It had laced and pleated sleeves with a matching collar. She was also wearing a beautiful headpiece. If it had not been for the fierce expression on her face, she would have looked like an exquisite doll. She spotted Thales, but she merely took a haughty glance at his dirty clothes and turned to the scrawny girl with glasses. Little rascal. The bespectacled girl became pale. My lady. The homework assigned by the etiquette teacher needs to be handed in tomorrow. Why haven't you done it? If I catch you reading again. The fancily dressed girl paused and caught a glimpse of a pile of books behind them. She made an I knew it face and scowled at the girl, whom she called Little Rascal. The little girl was shivering and casting a pleading glance at Thales. Oh, great. The girl tugged at her neat, fancy dress as she stepped forward. Her face was filled with rage. As I suspected, you're slacking in reading, little rascal. She then lifted her hand, much to Thales' astonishment, and smacked the bespectacled girl on the head. Little Sick let out a wretched cry as her lips quivered. Her eyes were squeezed shut. She crouched down and buried her head in her arms. You were supposed to finish my homework for tomorrow. The girl spat with an annoyed expression, while Thales gawked at her in horror. She stepped forward, and again, she raised her hand. Instead of slacking in reading books, neglecting the task given by your mistress. This time, she struck Little Rascal across the face. Thud. Little Rascal's glasses dropped to the floor. No, Lady Alex, it was as though Little Rascal was accustomed to such a treatment. There was little to no resistance from her side. She merely sniffled and explained, I wasn't, the homework for the etiquette class, needs a topic, so I'm researching for information on the foundation of constellation and extant. Did you just talk back to me? The sweet-looking girl pursed her lips. You're just a servant, my servant. How dare you? She lifted her hand once again, but it was seized by Thales. Wait a minute, Thales was displeased. You are a noble, you shouldn't be beating or chastising servants as you please. It's disgraceful. The blue-eyed, brunette girl glared at Thales. And who the hell are you? The dark-haired prince let go of her hand, fuming. Thales Jadastar. Frightened, poor Little Rascal crouched on the ground, squinting and shivering as she groped for her glasses. The girl hesitated. Oh, the prince who came to beg Grandpa for mercy. Peering at the boy who was one head shorter than her, she sneered. I'm giving my servant the punishment she deserves. You better stay out of it. Goddammit. Thales glowered at the spoiled young girl. Who knew I would still have to deal with obnoxious brats long after I escaped from abandoned house? Lady Alex. Thales and the girl were startled. The administrator who brought Thales into the Hall of Heroes, Lord Merc, appeared with a cold expression on his face. This ended the dispute between the children. Lord Merc bowed before the prince. Your Highness, you have strayed too far, he said slowly. With Merc's arrival, the girl seemed a little wary. She pouted her lips and looked away. Lord Merc. Thales nodded. He turned to look at the scruffy little rascal who managed to find her glasses in her state of worry. This. Merc scowled, giving the brunette girl a look of concern. This is Alex, he sighed as he gestured towards to her. Lady Alex Walton, King Nuven's granddaughter. Lady Alex, this is Prince Thales of Constellation, the son of King Kessel. Pressured by Merc's insistent glare, the young girl, Alex lifted her chin pridefully and huffed after his introduction. She held the hem of her skirt and bowed before Thales reluctantly. Thales nodded, frowning at the same time. Alex Walton. Sounds like a boy's name. And she's King Nuven's granddaughter. I've never heard of Prince Mariah having a daughter. Didn't His Majesty say that Prince Mariah was unmarried? Merc later turned to Alex and lectured her. My lady, your actions earlier were inappropriate, especially in the presence of Prince Thales of Constellation. Merc, the granddaughter of Nuven VII, Alex pouted. She's my servant, my family provides her food and shelter. Plus, soon, this prince will be. Lady Alex, Merc shot her a stern glare. We are not in your bedroom. This is King Raikuru's library, he said darkly. Startled, Alex flinched. She seemed afraid of Merc. HMPH, she tugged at her headpiece, her eyes flaring with anger. She gave her servant, who was squatting on the floor, a forceful yank. Come along, little rascal. Little rascal stumbled. She was clutching her glasses, and her eyes were reddened. We'll settle this in my room, Alex uttered fiercely. She then glanced at Thales and Merc before storming off. Filled with apprehension, Little Rascal kept her head down and followed her mistress. She took a fearful peek at Thales on the way. Thales clenched his fist. Watching the vanishing figures of the two girls, one scruffy and one refined, Merc sighed. He picked up the books left behind by Little Rascal and put them back on the bookshelf. Lady Alex is the daughter of Prince Mariah's elder brother, the late Crown Prince Soria. Losing both parents at a young age, King Nuven pampered her, which is why. He shook his head. Thales faked a smile, which looked more like a grimace. I see. King Nuven's deceased elder son. Then, there's the death of Prince Mariah. The suzerain of Dragon Cloud City, the patriarch of Walton family, lost all of his immediate male heirs. How did he pass away? Thales gazed at the dragon head coat of arms in the glass cabinet. I mean, Prince Soria. Merc lowered his head and a crease surfaced between his brows. In a hunting accident more than 10 years ago. Thales watched as his eyes dimmed. I was a member of the White Blade Guards back then. We were supposed to ensure his safety, but we failed to protect him, Merc said regrettably, shaking his head. Thales looked away. Follow me, I'll show you the way to your guest room. Unwilling to dwell on the previous topic, Merc turned back to him with his usual emotionless expression. I believe your entourage is waiting anxiously for you. Besides, you have a banquet to attend tonight. Startled, Thales lifted his head. He had to go look for Poutre and tell him everything. He wanted to seek advice from him, especially regarding. By the way, I have a message from His Majesty. It is the reply to your message, which was delivered through Nicholas, Merc said softly. Thales blinked. King Nuven. Lord Merc narrowed his eyes. The king agrees to put his original plan on hold. Hence, your highness, you shall proceed with yours to fulfill His Majesty's wishes. Find out who's the culprit. Avenge the late prince. Chapter 136 Stabs. The setting sun cast an amber light from the far west, while the sky above Dragon Cloud City had begun to dim. Somewhere in a narrow alleyway, however, the sounds of clashing metal could be heard. Flickering sparks from swords illuminated the two rivals in a bitter sword fight. Clunk. Cohen clenched his teeth. He was hunched down as he raised his saber over his head out of instinct, fending off the slash from his opponent. No. It's impossible to tell which direction my rival is going to strike. Sooner or later, I'll lose the fight. Cohen breathed in deeply and took a couple of steps back, distancing himself from his opponent. Up to this point, their weapons had clashed a total of 6 times. Cohen stared at his enemy's hand and a half-sword, pondering over the effects of his power of eradication. It was capable of masking the directions of his attacks. Nonetheless, that was not what worried him the most. The police officer's right hand was trembling uncontrollably. Glory of the stars flashed silver glimmers of light all over his skin, diffusing the violent power of eradication of his opponent, which targeted and numbed his arm. This is bad. Like his last encounter with another disaster sword, this vile power could be transmitted through swords into human bodies. It infiltrated, affected and destroyed any tissue component that could channel the power of eradication. The muscles in Cohen's right arm began to tighten and his face was grim. Good saber. Too bad it's not very useful in narrow spaces like this. The young man gazed at Cohen's black-handled silver saber, smiling away. Does it have a name? The young man was certain of his victory. The alley limited the movement of his opponent's weapon, whereas his hand and a half-sword could move with ease. Coupled with his formidable power of eradication, well, he gritted his teeth smugly. He had all the advantages in this fight in terms of physical environment, strategy, strength, and skill. This is the man sent by the Tower of Eradication to hunt us down. The young man stared at his opponent, smiling to himself and shaking his head. Cohen Carabayan, Cohen answered coldly. Just like Groudon, whom he met at Red Street Market, the young man's power was ruthlessly aggressive. Cohen's arm felt a tingle of pain during their last exchange, which acutely affected his movement. In other words, chaos and ferocity are complementing qualities. The abilities to cause numbing, painful sensations and mess with his opponent's sense of direction are the characteristics of his power of eradication. In that case, Cohen sighed, clutching his fist. Oh, I wasn't asking for your name. The young man narrowed his eyes, pointing his sword between Cohen's eyes. I was asking for the name of your sword. My soon-to-be prize. He watched as Cohen exhaled and switched hands to hold the blade. Cohen then said, You mean this saber? Oh, this is a family heirloom. As for its name. Cohen's expression darkened. It'll tell you itself. The silver saber was inches from the young man in a split second. After maintaining a defensive position for the last 2 exchanges, Cohen went on the offensive for the first time with a merciless stab. Without a sliver of doubt, his young opponent swung his arm confidently. He felt his power of eradication, accompanied by the energy of prickling ferocity surging up within him. Elated by the aching sensation, he made a lunge at Cohen with his hand and a half-sword in hand. A smile crept across his face. The young man knew that his power had far exceeded those of the obsolescent swordsmen of eradication, regardless of whether they were trainees or skilled swordsmen, who had long been in the field. The young man felt a ping of pain as the power flowed in his veins. It was strong and destructive way beyond anyone could ever imagine, especially the way it infiltrated into his enemies' bodies and unleashed its wrath on them like a fiendish beast. The fight would then end with a clear winner, or so he thought. The young man was suddenly surprised. He realized that there was something different about his opponent this time. Clink. Cohen's saber had a brief contact with his hand and a half-sword, but it was without any intention to spar or block its attack. The 2 blades bounced off each other after the light impact. The young man frowned slightly, while Cohen struck again. He attempted another stab. The young man warded off the blade, which was aimed at his abdomen. He watched in disbelief as Cohen parried his sword with another light touch, avoiding direct contact at all cost. This fellow, astonished, the young man gritted his teeth. What's going on? Damn it. Come on, the young man shouted, having his movement considerably restrained. The vile energy inside him was amplified. Again, Cohen immediately felt the tingle on his skin. Are you afraid of a direct confrontation? In response, the latter showed no sign of apprehension or agitation. Instead, he kept on charging at his enemy, one stab after another. Do you still think you can confuse your opponent with your elusive power? Cohen said coldly as he attempted another attack. Alarmed and enraged, the young man spun his sword, trying to shackle Cohen's saber with one of the sword styles of eradication, the blade lock. Nevertheless, Cohen promptly withdrew his sword after the momentary clash, refusing to linger even for a second. He left his opponent no chance for a counterattack. Relying on your power of eradication, that's your tactic, Cohen said in a calm manner, hoping to upset his opponent as he briskly advanced. Like I said, you're not the first disaster sword I've encountered. When I was recovering from my injuries, I thought of a strategy and practiced hundreds if not thousands of times in order to deal with disaster swords as well as their violent power. The effects of your power can only be observed when there's enough time for it to be transmitted through tangible contact, isn't it? Cohen stated grimly. For instance, during sword fights. The young man glared at Cohen in stupefaction. Meanwhile, the latter withdrew his sword and stepped forward. His expression then turned dark. Compared to your senior, Groudon, who has fought on the battlefield, and been to the hell and back, you are far beneath his standard. Cohen roared and followed up with another attack. Facing an inescapable threat, the young man merely took a step back before bounding towards his opponent and blocking the attack with his sword. Hiss. A brief, soft rasping sound resonated and faded as the two blades brushed against each other. The young man deflected Cohen's blow and watched frantically as his saber successfully evaded another direct confrontation and fleeted past him, being only inches away from his left ear. With a sharp, smug swoosh like a soaring falcon, Cohen prepared to launch another attack. Trying to limit the movements of my long saber with confined space. To the young man, Cohen's voice sounded terribly loathsome. Such an amateur tactic. I can deal with it with a mere stab. Simple, straightforward, effective. The narrow alley may have restricted Cohen's saber and the range of sword styles he could have employed, but this factor also suppressed the young man's agility. When facing an otherwise easily avoidable frontal stab, he was forced to retreat while trying to block the attack in desperation. The young man had briefly thought of going on the offensive rather than remaining in the defensive position. He was thinking of forcing Cohen into a full-scale sword fight. The only problem was, his hand-and-a-half sword was shorter than the opponent's saber by a considerable length. If he insisted on doing so, he would probably be speared in the chest by Cohen. The hand-and-a-half sword, which was supposedly useful in a narrow alley like this, became his disadvantage. Damn it! The young man peered at his opponent's charging blade with resentment. I have become the passive, defending party, who's at a disadvantage. In the meantime, Cohen turned sideways, without wasting a second. He stepped forward with his right foot and quickly advanced. He rotated his wrist and proceeded with another wave of attacks. There was another stab. Overwhelmed, the mortified young man retreated further. Lucky me, Cohen chuckled to himself. In an alley like this, when hacks and slashes are useless, it's a good thing I haven't forgotten your sword style, Teacher Clodier. Thrust and stab was the sword style that Steinker Clodier specialized in. He was one of the 8 scions of the Tower of Eradication, who was from the Alumbia Kingdom in Thornland. It originated from the era of the Final Empire, during which swordsmen in the south often engaged in graceful sparring with light blades. Despite being ridiculed and referred to as a lassies style by many army commanders and knights, this sword skill was once popular among the southern community. It relied on intrusive, assertive footwork and it was a one-strike wonder. Cut to the present, instead of the sword styles he normally practiced, Cohen resolved to using the thrust and stab. It turned the weakness of his long weapon into a strength, avoiding direct confrontation while at the same time preventing the enemy from bringing his power of eradication into full play. Up against another attack, the young man leapt out of its way and ducked behind a wide-open window, again successfully dodging Cohen's stab. Each power of eradication is unique. Cohen withdrew his weapon, walking past the clearly remodeled and lengthened window. His eyes were fixed on the enemy, which is to say, all the powers are different due to their possessors. It could even be just a slight difference. The young man looked at the long, narrow alleyway as well as the walls on his left and right, gazing at the faraway exit. His anxiety grew. I don't know the exact effects of your power of eradication. It managed to mess with my senses and mask the directions of your attacks, the police officer hummed. But you've probably heard of my power. He grinned, displaying what he assumed was a charming smile. Glory of the stars. The young man turned white. Glory of the stars. One of the 4 ancient forces, no, power of eradication. At the next second, Cohen lunged forward with a roar. Spots of light blue glimmered across his arm. Without pausing, the saber in his hand was thrusted forward repeatedly. The young man clenched his teeth. He twisted his wrists drastically as he mimicked the movement of a fan with his sword to ward off the persistent attacks. Damn it, he thought. This man must be a member of the 8 Seeds. He has to be from a certain cohort, who carries the Tower of Eradication's future, the embodiment of youth and hope. Clink, clink, clink. Each movement and short-lived strike was followed by one after another without break. It sounded like raindrops. Residing within me, glory of the stars dictates the tempo and rhythm of my movements. Followed by his relentless attacks, Cohen pushed forward. Oddly enough, despite his rapid advances, he managed to speak with ease and fluency. He did not appear to be short of breath. It sparkles like the bright stars in the night sky, unwavering and unceasing. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp blade flashed as it moved back and forth with graceful fluidity. The young man scowled and continued to retreat, the sword in his hand shaking slightly. Such a power may seem spontaneous and elusive, Cohen advanced at a threatening pace. His words rang in his opponent's ears like the deadly bell of Hell's River. But it's in fact, unending and unfaltering. He warded off the young man's sword with a light touch, and as the latter was thrown off balance, he proceeded with another wave of attacks. Arg! The young man screamed in anger as blood oozed from his punctured left shoulder. Losing his footing, he received a jab in the right side of his ribcage. This was followed by multiple stabs in his left leg, right elbow, and the side of his neck. Overwhelmed by Cohen's ceaseless attacks, the young man, who was now bathed in blood, stumbled backwards. He desperately widened the distance between them. Covered with wounds, the young man was panting heavily, his eyes wide with disbelief. He glared at Cohen, who was walking towards him. And that has been my power of eradication. Compared to your vile, violent, and senselessly destructive power, glory of the stars is like a phantom sword of mine. It lies within me, it's part of every single move I make. It is restless, Cohen sighed, and it will emit the most spectacular burst of energy the world has ever seen at any time. The young man propped himself up with his sword. He watched in despair as Cohen came closer and closer by the second. You ended Croce, killing the career of a seed as a swordsman in the process, Cohen said blankly. It's time to pay the price. With a blank expression, he lifted his saber and pointed it at the enemy. But there is another option for you, Cohen beamed as he spoke slowly. Would you rather tell me why you intend to assassinate the Prince of Constellation? And, which Archdukes of Exted, or their subordinates did you work for? The young man, who was covered in blood, gave a laugh. What a joke, we never work for anyone. He cackled as blood streamed down his severely wounded left shoulder and colored the snowy ground red. Even if it's a temporary alliance, we only act upon our own decision. Cohen frowned. Alliance? Why would they ally themselves with the archdukes of a nation? For power, wealth, status, survival, or a shared goal? Or, is it for some other purpose? As for you, you think you've won. A bunch of donnish, old-fashioned dummies, the young man gave him a twisted grin. In the meantime, my teacher has already. You're just stalling for time. I know that very well. Cohen calmly interrupted him. After all, you're merely a supra-class newbie. The young man was dumbfounded. So that your friend, the older, stronger guy can finish off the weaker enemy and come to your rescue, isn't it? The police officer sighed in a patronizing manner of a battle-seasoned soldier. But what makes you think that the girl is weaker? The young man watched with an alarmed expression as Cohen chuckled and shook his head. That girl, of all the members in my cohort, has passed the final appraisal of the Tower of Eradication and become the head of the 8 seeds. When Thales finally saw Poutre and the rest in the guest room of Heroic Spirit Palace, a feeling of relief washed over the prince as well as his entourage. So, what you're saying is, you refuse to cooperate with King Nuven's plan right on their turf and you intend to catch the killer on your own terms. Poutre frowned. He was standing by the window, staring at the snowy landscape outside. His mind was crowded with many thoughts. Is he being venturesome or simply reckless and dumb? In the absence of strangers, Poutre's attitude towards Thales was hardly respectful. He did not even address him as, Your Highness. Nevertheless, the instances of his disregard for etiquette had lessened significantly after leaving Broken Dragon Fortress, particularly the sarcastic form of address he would use, Little Prince. Yeah, more or less. Exhausted, Thales lolled in his chair in an ungainly manner. Based on what I've been through back in that hall, the old fox can't possibly have any well-intended plan, like serving me to the 5 archdukes on a chopping block and seeing who secretly wants me dead. Anyway, I have witnessed as well as experienced the incivility and bluntness of the Northlanders. Thales sighed, trying to find the killer by observing the Archduke's reaction towards the suggestion of my evisceration. That was one hell of a method he came up with. Now that the task is yours, what do you plan to do? Poutre turned around and ambled past Ralph. He was adjusting the splint for his fractured arm and adding a small, spare blade to his arm gear. We are talking about 5 experienced, influential, and cunning archdukes, who are more powerful than the 6 great clans of Constellation. They are eligible candidates for the king's selection, Poutre mumbled. You want to identify the person behind Mariah's murder and your attempted assassination among them? That's a good question. Thales flashed a friendly and genuine smile. I do not have the answer. Chapter 137 Kidnapping the Archduke. My loyal aides, this is why I need your help. Thales smiled. Poutre helplessly sighed. You're a truly empathic prince towards your subordinates. Thales concealed his guilt with a dazzling expression and beamed. Thank you, Lord Poutre Nimain. His attendant, Wya Casso frowned. Applying pressure on his rib that was seriously wounded by the vampire, he said, according to your theory, if these 5 archdukes face King Nuven in the meeting hall and act unanimously without a single weakness to be found in their behavior, how are we going to identify the murderer then? Poutre's gaze wandered, but Thales knew that this was his thinking expression. If the murder of Prince Mariah was intended to weaken the royal family, namely the Walton family, then just like your intended murder by the hands of Lampod, it is also to weaken the current favorite for king selection, the Lampod family. Additionally, it is also to cause war. Thales thought for a while. No wonder, King Nuven wants to use his own life to test the attitudes of the 5 archdukes towards the war of the 2 countries. Faced with the option of war, there will definitely be differences in the way they act. Thales pondered for a second. Recalling the scene just earlier, he silently said, if it's 5 people. What did you see? Poutre calmly asked as their eyes met. First, there was a bearded man. There was also a round symbol encasing an upright triangle on his apparel. He spoke very offensively. Thales focused on recalling his memories. He did not disguise his hostility against me. Every word he said was intended to dishonor me. That bearded lord who caused him to beg on his knees was on top of Thales' suspect list. Archduke Rabian Olesha of the prestige Orchid region. Among the 3 southern archdukes, he has the best relationship with King Nuvan, Poutre responded quickly. The Olsius family did not follow the 9 family of knights under Rikaru. In fact, only 6 out of the 9 great clans still have the position of archduke. And only 200 years ago, by virtue of Walton's support, they became the rulers of the prestige Orchid region, thus connecting borders with our Overwatch city. He indeed has a reason to dishonor you, Poutre continued. The land on which the central territory of Constellation lies is the original ancient chauvinistic province of the empire. It was the territory the Olsius family was ordered to rule since the ancient empire, until His Majesty, the King of Renaissance drove them away from their hometown with his army. Judging from this perspective, Olsius and Jadistar were in fact, bitter enemies. That's really strange. Wya shook his head. Would someone really express hostility to you because of a family feud that happened over 600 years ago? Perhaps he was acting deliberately under the pressure of the family's reputation, but it's hard to say. After all, there are still people brooding over the ancient empire from thousands of years ago. Thales grudgingly shrugged, ignoring Poutre's cold look. How patriotic. Wya nodded pensively. Next, there was a middle-aged man with a bowl cut. His body was adorned with the shine of a sword's blade. His speech was very peculiar as he tried his hardest to provoke King Nuvan's hatred for me. Thales rubbed his chin. Pondering, he said, from the taunting, sneering and strange speech, I do feel like his mockery was too aggressive and lacking in standards. The bowl cut, Thales silently said in his heart, even had the audacity to say to everyone that he refuses to send troops without any benefits to himself. At this point, Thales let out an audible laugh. I am not a natural like Duke Cyril Fakenhas when it comes to finding the perfect timing, nor am I as sharp and direct as you. It really causes one to feel helpless. Poutre was either not paying attention, or just pretending not hear the prince's self-derogatory speech. He simply nodded and replied, that's Porphyus Trendita of Reformation Tower. He is also one of the southern archdukes. I've heard that he acts cautiously and wisely, yet he is often mocked as being selfish and conservative. If that's so, does that mean he wants you to die at the hands of King Nuvan? Wya raised his head. Could it be him? The Reformation Tower is situated in the northeastern side of Constellation. Its territory neighbors are Lonely Old Tower. Poutre exhaled. Compared to a regional conflict, the benefits he can reap from an outright war between the 2 countries are actually limited. Of course, the damages will probably be limited as well. The third one was an old, bald man. He's very elderly. Thales took a deep breath. This person gives me mixed feelings. He did not speak lesser than the first 2, but he did not express definite emotions. Most of the time, he just went along with things and instigated strife. The bald Rogers Lecco, Archduke of Defense City. They have shackles as their symbol. Poutre touched his pipe and his eyes flashed. He's one of Extit's 2 northern archdukes. He rarely takes part in Extit's central affairs, but this time, he actually came forth by invitation. It's surely suspicious. Sounds like an unconcerned neutral party. Wya wiped his sword. If I'm the mastermind behind all this, Thales unfolded his hands and did not say much, I'd be willing to behave neutrally myself. Poutre remained silent. The 4th archduke has long hair and an illustration of an ancient book on his clothes. The second prince reached out to grab the armrest and lifted himself off of the chair. He gives me a feeling similar to that of the Duke of the Northern Territory. Bold, imposing and also seemingly values, at least superficially, his own honor. It doesn't seem like it could be this long-haired man, who is reluctant to dishonor his family, but hasn't the Duke of the Northern Territory betrayed King Kessel, his own Northern Territory, and even Constellation? Kulgan Rockney, whose territory borders the faraway prayer city of Kemu Union. It's in the west of Extit, near the northern end of the Great Desert. The slim vice-diplomat of Constellation stopped walking. He sometimes works together with the western desert hill of Constellation. The orcs and barren bone people of the desert are our mutual threats. The start of war between our countries or the weakening of Constellation will only cause additional pressure to them. Don't forget, Duke Arund of the Northern Territory and Lampod of the Black Sand region have collaborated before. The objective was in fact, Prince Mariah. Thales looked at him with a sharp gaze, even if war between the 2 countries would have brought harm upon the former's northern territory. Finally, the last one I met was also the youngest, Concre Pofret. He had a childlike air about him. He jumped off Extit's hardwood chair. He was soft-spoken and also a little hesitant. It seemed like he really respects King Nuvan. When he deliberates matters, he puts the overall interests of Extit first. He even put in a good word or 2 for me. He was the 30-year-old youngster who got choked by King Nuvan's harsh words. A childlike air, such words coming from you, Poutre chuckled and shook his head. That is Concret Pafred of Blood Shu. As the Archduke of Beacon Illumination City, his territory lies near Dragon Cloud City. The Pafred family is a newly promoted archducal family, less than 100 years of rule in Beacon Illumination City, yet they are one of the most trusted right hands of the Walton family. Young people are often impulsive and naturally come into conflict with conspiracy. Not necessarily. We have a young duke in our own country. Thales recollected his memories of the Duke of Iris Flowers and the mishaps along the way. He let out another sigh. I believe you have experienced it. His schemes are never inferior to those of any old men. Based on what you've said, every archduke seems suspicious. Wya knitted his brows. Are we still unable to pinpoint someone? Thales and Poutre both turned silent. Prestige Orchid region and Reformation Tower are the same as Black Sand region. They all border Constellation. The bilateral relations impact them the most, Poutre said softly. The city of Faraway Prayer is in the west, Defense City is in the north, whereas Beacon Illumination City is near the center of Dragon Cloud City. In short, if we want to find out who will be the one benefiting from the situation in the end, we will first need to rank the archdukes according to their degree of suspicion. Hiya, but suspicions will remain as suspicions. It cannot be validated. Thales scratched at his own hair. Dejected, he said, we urgently need a police officer who knows how to solve a case. In the armor district of Dragon Cloud City, Officer Cohen, who had been fighting a bitter war, sneezed roughly. An inch of his hair got cut off by his opponent's sword. Wya flipped his sword from his knees as he asked worriedly, if we fail to aid King Nuven in identifying his son's murderer, will the consequences be severe? The born king's imposing expression and Nicholas's cold glance drifted through Thales' mind. He rolled his eyes. It's best to not imagine such scenarios, a father with an ardent desire to seek vengeance for his son. He was not merely a son, Poutre added. Mariah was also the heir to the Walton family in Dragon Cloud City. Such hatred is far beyond our imaginations. Besides, King Nuven is surely doing his utmost best to eliminate dangerous opponents for his family. Indeed, judging from his current age, Walton's reign will not last much longer. Furthermore, the Walton family will be succeeded by someone completely incapable. So much so that, under orders of the new king, a Dragon Cloud City that loses its immediate successor could be granted to another family. The Waltons' successive decline from then on could be a possibility, Poutre flatly said. Thales sighed. Of course, I had to use this to threaten Nicholas. The frustrated Thales sat on the ground, leaning his head against the edge of the chair. He kneaded his face helplessly. Speaking of which, with eyes wide open, Thales recalled his encounter in the library. The unkempt little girl wearing glasses and the stubborn girl's shadows flashed before him. I met the granddaughter of King Nuven in Heroic Spirit Palace. Have you heard of this? Alex Walton, listening to Thales' description, Poutre knitted his brows. I have heard about it. Prince Soria, who died 12 years ago, was King Nuven's eldest son. He left a daughter behind. Probably due to the misfortune of her father, King Nuven has always strictly protected his granddaughter. If you had not brought it up, I'm afraid a lot of people would not have even known her name. Can she not be the heir to the Walton family? Thales exhaled as he thought of the gorgeous little princess. Just because she's a lady? Poutre shook his head. According to the Northlanders, damn philosophy, a woman is a mere subsidiary and piece of property. Her only value lies in being a mother and giving birth. The three men looked behind them at once and saw Ida. She sat on a bed that supposedly belonged to Thales without hesitation. While she wiped her exquisite machete clean, she said with a rare, frosty tone, after centuries, things have not changed. Amongst the struggles related to Walton, she is unimportant. Poutre shook his head. Let's go back to solving the current problem at hand. Thales closed his eyes and pouted. Fortunately, we're not in a rush. At this moment, a knock came from the room's door. Scowling, Ralph pulled it open. The new recruit rescued by Thales, Willow Ken, stood at the door. He scratched his head and smiled. That Marquis of Camus has sent word. Willow seemed to be pleased at the opportunity to meet the prince. He chuckled. According to his subordinate, it seems to be quite important. Thales knitted his brows. He said that there are 2 archdukes. Tomorrow morning. They will be leaving Dragon Cloud City to attend to certain matters. Willow laughed as he finished his message. But at the next second, he surprisingly found that almost everyone's expression in the room, Thales included, had changed dramatically. Tomorrow morning. Ashen-faced, Thales looked as if he had just received the worst news ever. Can it be? The archdukes, were they just here to take a look at me, and then leave immediately? After the departure of Willow, who had an unfathomable expression on his face, Ralph lightly closed the door with the same scowl on his face. Tomorrow morning, Wya looked distressed. Thales' breath quickened. With a bleak look in his eyes, he said, that means. Yes, Poutre worriedly pinched his pipe, the time that we have left. He did not continue, but everyone silently said in their hearts, only one night left. I'll repeat myself. Wya Queso's face turned pale as he returned his sword to its sheath. If we fail to aid King Nuven in identifying his son's murderer, will the consequences be severe? Poutre sighed as he shook his head. Stop asking, Wya. This evening's welcoming banquet, it's our last chance. Thales gritted his teeth. Think of a way to single out that bastard. Damn. How can I be so unlucky? Based on King Nuven's probing and observation methods, I'm afraid it will not be fruitful. Poutre's grip on his pipe tightened. Your experience this morning proves my point. Then, Thales muttered. At this moment. Let us go for them. Ida jumped off the bed fiercely. Everyone casted their gaze upon the elf protector. Let Nuven segregate manpower to accommodate us. At night, we shall conceal our faces and secretly kidnap those archdukes. One by one, we will punish and interrogate them. We shall see how long these so-called archdukes can hold out under the sword. Everyone was stunned by this side Ida showed. 2 seconds later. Everyone pretended as though they never heard her. They turned back and acted normally. Let us have a change in perspective. Thales rubbed his hands together. He furrowed his brows and said to Poutre, the person we're looking for collaborated with Lampod in the murder of King Nuven's son. Hey, why are you acting like you didn't see me? Ida gritted her teeth, obviously dissatisfied with being ignored by the others. At least give me some reaction. However, he interfered with Lampard's army. He attempted to frame Black Sand region with your murder, Poutre answered instinctively. Are there any clues inside? Wya curiously asked. The elf protector behind them protested by waving 2 machetes in the air, to no avail. King Nuven and I only know as much. Thales shook his head. It seems pretty useless. No. Perhaps we should not revolve our thoughts around King Nuven's thoughts. Poutre put down the unlit pipe in his hand, his eyes shining with confidence. Ida lowered her head dejectedly and sighed. She retreated to Thales' bed. Thales froze. He looked at Poutre and furrowed his brows. You mean? Remember when we were surrounded by Lampard's army at Broken Dragon Fortress? Poutre said softly. Of course, it left a deep impression. Blood and light flashed before Thales' eyes, not to mention Araka Merc's raging growl. He sighed. It was an utter mess. Drowning in boredom, Ida fiddled with her machetes on the bed. Then, I reckon you remember what the Baron told you before the frontline charge. Poutre smiled mysteriously. King Nuven is not our only option. All of a sudden, Thales' body trembled. Before the charge. The image of Araka swaying his big sword popped up in his mind. A few seconds later, he nodded. Thales took a deep breath, his unswerving determination apparent. Since there's no turning back, why don't we go charging at full force? Thales looked at his vice-diplomat with a burning gaze. He knows. Poutre smirked affirmatively. He knows. Baffled, Wya and Ralph watched as the both of them talked in riddles. Wya found it difficult to swallow. So, what should we do? Thales and Poutre's eyes met, after which they laughed. Ida was right. Thales looked at the elf on the bed. Under Poutre's gaze, he nodded. Ah, when her name was mentioned, she eagerly looked up. Although, she was a little bewildered. What? In the middle of Ya's shock and Poutre's laughter, Thales took a deep breath and said, We shall find them. Ida's mouth hung open wider than ever. Poutre became serious in an instant and he retired his pipe. I'll get ready immediately and contact the others, maybe we will need some help from the inside. Also, Wya, Ralph, come with me. Thales returned to his seat, rapidly weighing out the feasibility of the plan. That. He raised his head and turned backwards. Ida's voice could be heard as she faintly asked, You guys really want to kidnap the archdukes? Chapter 138 Numb Hands. It's so cold. Where is Mother? What about Aunt Fina? They'll come back, right? She thought dazedly as she curled up from the cold on the snow-covered ground. The chilly wind blew past her cheeks and neck, causing a pain that was akin to being cut by a knife. Even her limbs were rapidly losing all sensation. What about my younger brother and sister? What about Uncle Enzo? She was starting to miss Talia's hot pies, even though she always hated the garlic on them. She walked past a person lying on the snow-covered ground. That person was sound asleep, and his curled-up body did not move at all. But he had the happiest smile on his face. He did not even know that his eyebrows and hair were covered in frost. This is a smiling person, she told herself. Yesterday, when she tried to brush the frost on their faces away, Uncle Enzo smiled and told her that those are smiling people. They like to smile while asleep in the wild during winter, and would only wake up in spring. Good girls must not disturb them, and it was the best not to go near them. Obediently, she continued walking forward. Her skirt was a little torn, and she was very dismayed over it. It was a skirt Aunt Lissa gave her before departing for the capital city. She walked past a second, smiling person. This, smiling person, seemed to be a woman who was around Talia the female slave's age. She wore very few clothes, leaned against a rock with the corner of her lips curled upwards, and had a baby in her bosom. But the baby was not smiling. Instead, the baby's tiny eyes and lips were shut tight, and did not move at all. This made her very unhappy. Why is the baby not smiling? Shouldn't everyone in the Northern Territory smile? Uncle Nolanur had said this to her. Beside the stables of Cold Castle, when Uncle Nolanur was about to leave with her 2 other uncles, he laughed loudly and embraced her like usual. He then rubbed his stubble on her face despite her aggrieved protests. All right, Nolanur, her thoughts were in a jumble, and she could not help but smile as she thought about her youngest uncle. If you appear now, I'll show mercy and forgive you for your beard. Continuing on the snow-covered ground, she encountered a 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th, so many, countless, smiling people. Then, someone who was not a smiling person, finally appeared in front of her. With dull, glassy eyes, she raised her head and looked at the boy, a stranger to her. Dressed in ragged clothes, the boy was bent over a smiling person, and searching for something. The boy realized that she was approaching and raised his head like an angry beast. His dark red eyes were extremely horrifying. Go away. The boy subconsciously and fervently guarded the items in his bosom and glared ferociously at her. His voice was cautious and guarded. I found this one first. The food, clothes, and everything else are all mine. Go away now. Go far away. Go and scavenge from some other corpse. She inhaled weakly, feeling the pain in her wind-grazed cheeks. So fierce, she pouted. She was a little hungry, though. Her sight was blurry. The icy coldness surged into her lungs through her mouth, nose, and airway, making her heart convulse. She walked towards the boy. Little b*tch, if you dare take one more step forward. The boy, who was also trembling from the cold, opened his mouth and flashed his teeth with a ferocious expression. I will chew you into pieces alive. She ignored the boy, but her consciousness was becoming number. Her sight also grew dimmer. And yet she still advanced through the snow-covered ground on unsteady steps. She relied on her sight instead of the touch of her feet to be sure that the ground was beneath her feet. She could hardly feel her limbs anymore, they have been numb for quite some time. The boy crawled on the ground and let out a deep growl that sounded like a wild animal, as if preparing to attack. Watching the hideous-looking boy, she inhaled deeply. Her lungs quivered again from the cold air. She continued walking forward. The boy's face went from cautious to hateful and murderous. He extended his right hand that held a long, rust-covered awl from behind his body. Mother said before that when meeting a stranger. Roaring furiously, the boy pounced onto her weak body and pushed her onto the ground. When meeting a stranger. She pinched her cheek that had been numbed by the cold. Glaring at her face, the boy ferociously raised the awl in his hand. Watching the boy's dark red eyes, she forced the corners of her lips upwards. We must smile. Everyone from the Northern Territory should smile, shouldn't we? The next moment, the chief seat among the swordsmen of eradication, Miranda Arund opened her eyes abruptly in an alley in Dragon Cloud City. A sword with a groove in it pierced through her breastplate into her left chest. The tip of the sword had penetrated an inch deep into her skin. It stopped just before her endlessly beating heart, yet the blade did not move even an inch further. The middle-aged disaster swordsman furrowed his brows. He stared at the tip of Miranda's sword which had lodged inside the groove that spanned from the tip to the middle of his sword, stopping his strange sword from advancing, stopping it from piercing into the swordswoman's heart. Just now, Miranda resolutely extended her sword at a crucial moment and lodged the blade inside the groove of her enemy's sword. Just like how a carpenter lodges a wedge inside the groove in a piece of wood. Miranda held the hilt of her cross-guard saber tightly with her clad in black gloves. Refusing to bulge from the enemy, her forehead was drenched in cold sweat from pain and fear. He maneuvers the sword very quickly, and, that feeling of being unable to escape, does it come from his power of eradication? Not bad indeed. The middle-aged man exhaled softly and showed a look of admiration. Your reaction, observation skills, and temperament are exceptionally outstanding. You are very young, too, which is rare. My student is very intelligent, but lacks practice and experience. He would need at least 5 years to reach your level. However, you were already on the verge of death from the beginning. The middle-aged man's tone was cold, and he abruptly exerted force onto the sword that had pierced Miranda's chest, pushing it forward. Under the force, there was a slight change in shape to the two swords that were lodged together. The sound of metal clashing against each other forcefully rose into the air. A surge of pain hit her chest. Miranda's face contorted slightly. The sword had only to go another inch deeper to reach her body and drew blood. Gritting her teeth while holding her breath, the swordswoman tried to let neither the intense physical pain nor the psychological worry affect her. Listening to the enemy's rhythm in his movements and feeling the enemy's beat while he swung his sword, she forced herself to enter the zone. She was in an extremely disadvantageous position after only the first attack. She had to find an opportunity to turn the tide. Resisting the enemy's sword with all her might, Miranda opened her eyes wide and observed her unmoving enemy under the setting sun. The middle-aged man heaved a sigh. You know, I didn't want to do this at first, but from what I can see right now, it seems that using only sword styles and speed cannot take you down at once, and the patrols will be here in 4 minutes. Then, the middle-aged man showed a pained and disturbed expression. A violent power of eradication exuded from his arm muscles and seeped into the two interlocked swords. Miranda's expression changed. Is this the type of ruthless and unbridled power of eradication that Cohen talked about? As the middle-aged man's arm trembled, an explosive energy rose from his sword. It was as if a fierce, man-eating beast was released. Vibrating at an increased speed, the two swords made sounds that were akin to groaning patients that could not bear their burdens anymore. Miranda could feel the tip of the sword inside her body vibrating and moving closer towards her heart. Crap. The next moment. Rip. Blood splattered everywhere. Miranda pressed her left hand to her chest in pain. But it had not ended yet. Clang. The two swords clashed together and emitted sparks, detaching from each other in the air. The middle-aged man's sword disappeared. It then suddenly reappeared again, like a star in the night sky. Its strike aimed at the injured Miranda. The swordswoman raised her sword with trembling hands and subconsciously waved it in the air. Cling, clang. Having detached for less than a second, the two swords clashed again in the air. Miranda's sword blocked the enemy's attack twice. Both retreated a step at the same time. Pale-faced, Miranda leaned against the wall behind her and looked at the middle-aged man with wide eyes. I hope you have a peaceful death, swordswoman, the middle-aged man said as he sighed, flinging away the blood on his sword. But the middle-aged man's expression suddenly froze. He noticed the blood on his sword. There was only a little bit of blood on it. How is this possible? I definitely pierced through her heart, but is her heart on the right, or is she equipped with protection that can shield her from the powers of eradication? The dwarves, refined crystal drop board, the elven royal family's fine silver armor, or silica gel. The middle-aged man raised his head in disbelief and stared at Miranda, who leaned against the wall weakly. That strange power of eradication did not work, did it? The swordswoman inhaled deeply and removed her left hand from her chest. A long wound extended from Miranda's chest to her shoulder, but it only scratched and pierced through her light armor, drawing little blood. The middle-aged man wore an astonished gaze. According to the original plan, his beast-like power of eradication would have invaded her body without her being capable of doing anything to stop it. It would damage her internal organs and delay her movements. It would even devour and exterminate her power of eradication like a natural predator. Then, when she cannot move or was in immense pain, he would push the blade of his sword into her body with his power of eradication. It was supposed to pierce straight into Miranda's heart. Perhaps not deeply, but it would have been deep enough for her to bleed. Next, he would wave his sword with horrifying speed and mobilize the blood in her entire body. Within fractions of a second, bright arterial blood would spray out of the swordswoman of eradication's chest until the moment her life ended. But unexpectedly, she was able to block off the attack that was bound to pierce her chest. The middle-aged man stared at the girl in bewilderment. From when I started attacking, your movements were quite normal, and you could smoothly wave your sword. You were able to fend off my attack without hesitation. Does this mean that, a few seconds later, the middle-aged man looked as though he understood something? His gaze was filled with astonishment. Impossible. The middle-aged man furrowed his brows tightly. You are not affected by the touch of greed, at all. Miranda inhaled deeply and repositioned her sword. The touch of greed. This is the name of your power of eradication. Such a despicable name, Miranda said coldly. My companion told me about that feeling before. An unbridled power of eradication that aims to invade, damage and destroy. She raised her sword and pointed it at her opponent. An ordinary swordsman of eradication would probably be helpless in the face of such a horrifying power of eradication. But when a situation arises where this power doesn't work, what would all of you do? The middle-aged man did not speak. Instead, he brandished his sword with lightning speed. The sword with the groove in it whistled through the air and pointed at the swordswoman's throat. Having been more than prepared, Miranda wore a solemn expression and turned her wrist. Her power of eradication surged along with the movement and supplemented the force of her hand as she pointed her sword at the middle-aged man. Clang, swoosh. Two trails of sparks appeared from the violent clashing. In the blink of an eye, their swords clashed twice. The two figures moved rapidly. After their swords met one final time, they immediately pulled back, creating a distance of 5 steps between them. Stepping back and feeling the vibration from her cross-guard saber, Miranda calmly pondered over her enemy's distinguishing features. I attacked you 8 times with my sword just now. You only managed to block me twice, and I even hit you once. Looking at Miranda's lacerated left leg, the middle-aged man said steadily, your sword style is sloppy and ordinary, and you cannot catch up with my speed at all. Your body seems agile, but you are just lithe. Occasionally, you even misstepped while dodging my attacks. The unusual problem was that your sword was even trembling slightly when our swords met, to the point that it affected your craft. That is supposed to be beginner's mistake. Apart from that stunning interception at the very beginning, your sword is practically useless. The middle-aged man shook his head. With your way and ability of wielding the sword, you should have died 10,000 times over. How did you survive until now? Miranda did not say anything. Instead, she scrutinized the middle-aged man carefully. Then, her enemy suddenly flashed a smile. However, among the 8 times I attacked you just now, you were able to perfectly avoid the 5 most fatal blows, either by dodging or by brushing past them. You also launched a counterattack at the subtlest moment. Looking at his lacerated left arm, the middle-aged man frowned and said in astonishment, and you succeeded, too. Miranda finally frowned. There is only one explanation. The middle-aged man took slow steps. Miranda's sword slowly moved along with his position. You do not depend on ingenious sword movements and agile steps when fighting. Instead, you rely on your observation skills and senses. The middle-aged man's pupils contracted slightly. You identify the enemy's patterns and the timing of their attacks. Even with lousier skills and shabbier moves, if one appears in the most suitable place at the most suitable time, the most ingenious attack can be made. Miranda exhaled mentally. He found out. You are practicing one of the 4 main original powers of eradication, the Pegasus, music. It is famed for the precision of timing and the control of rhythm. The middle-aged man heaved a loud sigh. It has been a long time since I have seen this legacy from inside the Tower of Eradication, and the reason you are not afraid of the touch of greed. He raised his head. His gaze was oppressing. I have roughly guessed it too. Miranda was slightly stunned. The middle-aged man fixated on Miranda's hands, which were clad in black gloves. It's your hands, isn't it? Miranda stared at him in disbelief. Forget about the Pegasus, music. For him to even realize this. Miranda grasped her sword tightly. Your hands were the first to come into contact with the touch of greed. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and scrutinized his opponent carefully. But there was no reaction at all. Is it because of those gloves? Miranda did not say anything for a few seconds. The scene in the wilderness many years ago appeared in her mind. That bone-chilling coldness. No, it's not the gloves. Miranda exhaled softly, raised her head and readily told the truth. It's just my hands. The middle-aged man furrowed his brows. A long time ago, my hands suffered from serious frostbite. Yards of white snow appeared in Miranda's mind. Upon recovery, the sense of touch and pain were mostly lost, Miranda said plainly, as if it had nothing to do with her at all. I can neither practice nor use those ingenious, splendid and enigmatic sword styles. In the beginning, I cannot even raise a teacup. No matter how horrifying the pain wrought by your power is, my hands are unable to feel it. In the face of these hands of mine that has been numbed for years, what can your invasive power of eradication do? Miranda slowly raised her sword. It was obvious even to the naked eye that her hands were shaking slightly. There was silence. The middle-aged man stared at Miranda's hands with a shocked gaze. Those hands, those sword-wielding hands, actually, cannot feel pain, and have no sense of touch either. The middle-aged man's gaze was filled with pity. In respect. You can actually hold a sword with these hands of yours that have no sense of touch. Speaking slowly, his voice was filled with admiration. This young girl, for those senseless hands to be able to hold the hilt of a sword, and to wave it countless times in the air, there must have been a lot of suffering involved. So, the Pegasus, music was imparted onto you. Of course, this is also the power of eradication that suits you the most. The middle-aged man nodded. His gaze was filled with acknowledgement and excitement. To discard what your hands feel and disregard specific moves, following the rhythm of the battle instead. To entrust your sword to your observation skills, perception, and judgment. Your teacher is probably a genius. Miranda did not say anything. She only stared at her gloved hands in a daze. Please forget my earlier disrespect. The middle-aged man placed his sword behind his back and bowed respectfully at Miranda in the standard style of the ancient swordsman. You are a swordswoman who deserves admiration. I am Saran Klein, a swordsman of eradication from outside of the Tower of Eradication. It was indeed my honor to fight hand-to-hand with you. Miranda also sheathed her sword and returned the salute expressionlessly. Miranda Arund, the 134th chief seed of the Tower of Eradication, due to something all of you have done to my friend's right hand, please forgive me, for it is very hard for me to say that, it was also my honor fighting hand-to-hand with you. Klein smiled slightly. Right hand, is that so? Both straightened their bodies. Their swords reappeared beside them. The next moment, they closed in on each other again. Cling, clang. Klein's rapid sword movements and Miranda's ingenious movements moved back and forth within the tiny space. In barely 10 seconds, Miranda managed to dodge 4 fatal strikes from her enemy and launched a counterattack at the most vital moment. There was blood on Miranda's waist and behind her ear. Klein's left forearm was bleeding, too. You leave such a deep impression. Klein stepped away from her and sighed. Given time, you can definitely reach supreme class. Miranda nodded in acceptance of his acknowledgement. No matter how fast you are, Miranda thought, you cannot bypass the process of drawing your sword. With process comes rhythm, the moving and stopping, and the rise and fall of your sword. There would then be weaknesses that I can control and destroy his movements. And I also noticed something. Miranda scrutinized her enemy as she stepped away from him. She said flatly, your so-called touch of greed, that ceaseless, continuous violence. Klein was slightly stunned. Miranda's gaze was firm. It is the glory of the stars, isn't it? Under Klein's surprised gaze, Miranda confidently said, "Sorry, this power of eradication, I am way too familiar with it." The scene in the Tower of Eradication, where Cohen held his swollen arm and cried miserably, appeared in her mind. Both met eyes for a moment. "I really admire your observation skills, but it is not just that." Klein shook his head and chuckled. "The touch of greed is not the glory of the stars." Under Miranda's puzzled gaze, Klein kept his sword beside his waist. "If you really want to put it that way, it can be considered as an upgraded version of Glory of the Stars from outside the tower." Miranda was bewildered. The upgraded version of the Glory of the Stars? Is he referring to those violent characteristics? Then, the disaster sword's powers of eradication are derived from the original ones. 30 more seconds. Klein sighed. "Forget about it, there isn't enough time." Miranda stared at him in shock. "See you next time, numb-handed chief." Klein nodded slightly. Miranda gritted her teeth and ran after him. "Wait." Klein turned and punched the wall beside him. Bam! Amid the dust, his silhouette disappeared from Miranda's sight. At this moment, the patrolman's voices rose from outside the alley. "It's nearby, it's suspected that there's an illegal armed fight, and that those people are chasing each other for no reason." What was that sound? Coughing non-stop because of the dust, Miranda gazed determinedly at the direction Klein left from. She punched the wall indignantly. Amid the approaching sounds of the patrolman, she sheathed her sword and left. Ellipsis. Clang. As Cohen's sword was about to pierce into that young man's throat, a sword appeared out of nowhere and deflected the police officer's rapier. Cohen quickly turned to face the newcomer who had his body turned against the setting sun. However, the newcomer's sword caught all of Cohen's attention. It was a medium-length sword with an extremely thin blade, with a black pommel on the hilt. A round hole was drilled onto the sword's knuckle guard, allowing the user to put his index finger through it. Cohen's pupils constricted. He recognized the sword. He was way too familiar with that sword. And way too familiar with the sword's owner. "Get the hell out of here," the newcomer said, loud and clear to the young disaster swordsman. "Go and look for your teacher." Covered in wounds, the young man awkwardly got up and limped away, but Cohen did not care about that. He opened his eyes wide and stared at the newcomer in disbelief. After seeing this person, he stopped wanting to care about anything else. Cohen swallowed his saliva with difficulty and asked in the most disbelieving and surprised tone ever, "Why are you here? And, what are you up to now?" Staring at the newcomer, Cohen furrowed and relaxed his brows repeatedly. "What am I doing?" The newcomer snorted softly and walked towards him. "To get here before you idiots ruin everything." The newcomer revealed a pair of dark red eyes in the darkness and said plainly, "And to stop all of you." Or. The newcomer stepped out of the shadowed alley. "Kill all of you." Cohen's ex-batchmate from the Tower of Eradication and the current member of the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department, Raphael Lindbergh, had a sword in his left hand. Blinking his dark red eyes, he looked at his former friend, the police officer, Cohen Karabayan, with a smile. Chapter 139: A Unique Welcome Banquet. "Are you sure that I don't have to wear this?" Madame Gines said that during banquets, in the room, Thales questioned Poutre. Furrowing his brows, he held up a tiny, embellished vest. And these were part of the luggage the diplomat group strived hard and went through a lot of trouble to bring, along with the flags. "We're in Exted, which is in Northland." The neatly dressed Poutre looked at him with disdain. "Even during a banquet, they dislike pretty boy toys and sissies. If you really want to wear that, I reckon you will become the top contender for the biggest clown in the banquet." Thales stuck out his tongue and put the vest down. Sitting beside the window, Ida recovered her attention and sighed with a regretful expression. "Ah, you know, banquets without clowns are boring." After almost a month of stress, Thales did not have the strength to care about other things. From the abandoned house in Red Street Market, to Mindy's Hall in Renaissance Palace, and then from Broken Dragon Fortress to Dragon Cloud City, the newly crowned second prince did not even get the chance to sleep properly in his own bed. He was whisked into a noble's carriage and with the burden of being a prince, faced unprecedented challenges. Hence, Thales only realized that he had no experience nor knowledge of noble banquets when Merc and the servants came to remind them about it. He had never lost his composure when facing weapons, soldiers, blood clansmen and mystics. But now, he suddenly felt a little nervous. "Don't worry," Poutre nonchalantly lit the Northland tobacco that he obtained from the servants. Compared to Constellation and the Anlenzo dukedom, Exted's banquets are practically just a military picnic of simple-minded soldiers. If you have experienced the banquet styles of handball and Maine Ed Knox, my god, their banquet etiquettes are practically punishments. Protocols, decorations, trends, and styles. The effort to segregate human beings based on their identity, status and ranking never ceases. Thales tried his best to calm himself down by making small talk. He bent down and adjusted his shoes in front of a simple and crude dressing mirror. "After tonight, I must take a bath. Think of tonight's official business first." Poutre seemed as if he was not used to Northland's rough tobacco. He said with difficulty while coughing, "Cough, cough. Damn it, they brought me low-quality tobacco." Putre's words magically made Thales forget the uneasiness caused by the impending banquet. He began pondering the situation at hand. Someone knocked on the door. Ralph entered with the metal prostheses that he was getting more used to. It also seemed like this was the first time he attended this sort of banquets. Even with the silver mask on, the pale pallor on his face could still be seen. On the other hand, Wya seemed calmer, as though he had experienced such a scene before. Thales' attendant nodded solemnly. "Your Highness, everything is ready." Beside Wya, Ralph signed with his hands. "They are here." Thales nodded. The second prince inhaled deeply. Despite Putre's confused expression and Ya's tightly furrowed eyebrows, Thales signed back. "Let's go." Ellipsis. Extit's welcoming banquet started before the sun completely set. Led by the king's administrator, Merc, and a few servants, Thales walked beside Putre. Ralph and Wya walked behind them. As for Ida, everyone agreed that it was not suitable for her to be part of such an occasion. "Your Highness, I don't know what you understand about the banquets in Northland. However, I must remind you that the guests from Constellation might not be used to our banquet. And tonight will be a little unique," Lord Merc said expressionlessly. Thales flashed a friendly and understanding smile as a reply. Treading heroic spirit palace's coarse floor tiles, they climbed the stone stairs. Merc respectfully introduced the guests to the place they were about to go to. The banquet hall was where King Rikaru entertained the 9 knights. It was said that the Northland heroes' banquet lasted 3 days and 3 nights, and they ate almost all the food they seized during their crusade. It was also here where, amid the cheers inside and outside the palace, Rikaru Extit was elected as king. Stepping onto the final stone step, Thales arrived at the 6th floor corridor of Heroic Spirit Palace. Lively and noisy sounds could be heard. The floor was almost 7 or 8 meters away from the ceiling, and there were a lot of fire braziers. They were placed on stands that filled the entire corridor. Burning brightly, they illuminated Heroic Spirit Palace and made it look as bright as day even though the sun had set. Different from the corridor of other floors which were filled with rooms, this floor's corridor only had a pair of thick, wooden double doors in the middle of the floor. The servants walked back and forth, in and out of the room, and had jubilant expressions. Some held plates, and the others carried beer kegs. Thales inhaled deeply and exchanged glances with his subordinates. With Merc at the lead, he stepped into Heroic Spirit Palace's banquet hall. The noisy discussions, sounds of wine goblets clashing, sounds of cutlery cutting into meat, and even the sounds of brawling grew louder and began to invade as well as torture his ears. Thales raised his head and had a clear view of the hall. This was a ring-shaped hall. The triangular flag with the dragon spear emblem was hung on the walls. At the corners where the walls and floors were connected were several burning braziers. On the ceilings were several brightly shining everlasting lamps. Thank goodness, Thales thought the only source of light in the Hall of Spirits were braziers. The servants would occasionally appear from the side doors or the grills to deliver waves upon waves of food and wine. The banquet hall could accommodate a few hundred people in it. Such was the case right now. At least 100 or 200 people sat around more than 10 long tables that were placed parallel to each other. These long tables were placed perpendicular to the main door, and there was a path in the middle of the hall wide enough for the servants and guests to come and go. Thales looked around the hall with a frown. Because of his height, he could not see the situation further down the hall. In the end, it was Putre who explained it all to him in a soft voice. The atmosphere in the hall was very lively. There were busy servants carrying plates as they walked back and forth, boorish nobles who sat by the tables and argued until their faces were red, and guests who drank until they were blushing. There were also perverted nobles that used drunkenness as an excuse to grope the servant girls' behinds while laughing raucously. This caused the crowd to erupt into a loud cheer. The 5 archdukes sat at the head of 5 different long tables. Archduke Olsius, who sported a full beard, had a fixed expression and turned the goblet in his hand distractedly. Almost everyone beside him were family knights and subordinate suzerains that bore the emblem of a triangle-encased circle. Archduke Trendita, who sported a bowl cut, was laughing along with his vassals. He seemed very good at socializing. The bald Archduke Leko sat together with Camus Union's Marquis Shiles and listened to the latter as he spoke slowly. The long-haired Archduke Rockney had a solemn expression as usual. He seemed to exude a chilly aura. His long table was the quietest, and nobody else dared to approach him and make conversation. The servants and subordinates behind him refilled his food and wine every now and then. The young Archduke Pofred raised his goblet with a smile. The nobles around him who seemed to be either subordinate dukes or followers while he spoke to them, these followers nodded continuously. They then downed all the wine in their goblets at the same time. Such a jubilant dinner party. It's just like the scene in Mountain Pass village where the Northland villagers and the soldiers drank and socialized. If Thales had not raised his head and seen Nuven the Seventh drinking quietly on a much taller, horizontal table at the end of the hall while he sat among several close vassals and was surrounded by white blade guards, Thales would have nearly forgotten about the shadows of blades hidden among all these conspiracies. He had also almost forgotten that the conspirator who was daring enough to try to murder the princes of both kingdoms was among the 5 archdukes. Thales turned and said in resignation, "I did not know that the banquet had already begun. Most of the nobles are already seated. King Nuven is waiting for your arrival, Merc said calmly. Thales narrowed his eyes and finally managed to cast a glance at Nuven VII, who was far into the distance. He took note of the still indifferent expression on his face. The king seemed to notice that Thales was looking at him. His aged but sharp gaze swept towards Thales. Then, it's about to begin. Behind him, Poutre grumbled, intentionally or otherwise. Thales sighed in his heart. A few seconds later, under Merc's signal, the attendant beside them announced Thales' identity in a loud voice. The honorable guest from Constellation, Prince Thales Jadastar. The words traveled to every corner of the hall, and even echoed. The lively banquet suddenly became quiet. Almost everyone across all the tables stopped what they were doing to stare at Thales, whether they were drinking, cutting meat, chatting, fighting, or even harassing the servant girls. Even many of the servants, stationed guards and even members of the White Blade Guards looked at him. Thales recognized this feeling. The last time he felt it was in Eternal Star City, during the national conference in the Hall of Stars. Should I smile right now? Feeling various gazes ranging from malicious and murderous to curious and friendly ones, Thales did not change his expression. Moving his lips slightly, he said, or should I be stone-faced? Would it suit my identity as the enemy kingdom's prince? Relax, relax, they started the banquet early and didn't even arrange the seating order. There is no need for you to freak out and take it too seriously. Watching the anxious prince, Poutre sighed. It doesn't matter what expression you wear. Right now, you are just a flag called Constellation. The expressionless Merc nodded at Thales and politely extended his right hand, signaling for him to walk forward. Thales ignored Merc, enduring stares from the entire hall. He frowned and asked Poutre in a low voice, do I just walk forward like this? Or do I stay at the back and wait for someone to call me? If you were in Constellation right now, of course you would have to wait for the master to dispatch someone to lead you to your seat. However, this is Extit. Poutre glanced at the messy hall with furrowed brows. Many of the guests seemed to have lost their curiosity. Some of them were even starting to dig into the food that had been served. So, don't expect much formality. Walk to your seat without looking around. I reckon it's the one beside King Nuven. Thales put on the kind of humble and friendly smile he imagined that a prince would have and walked forward. Compared to Constellation, which emphasized protocols and etiquette for everything, there was not even a carpet in the banquet hall. Treading on the uneven floor tiles, he felt like he was back in the abandoned house. Walking past the long tables, he heard whispers. Having good hearing proved to be useful at that moment. So, this is the prince who still reeks of his mother's milk. I heard that he was lost outside for many years. 7 years old. Is this a joke? The Constellations talked about him like he was a god. You know, they call him a genius, HMPH. Then, our troops couldn't move at all because of this child. The people from Black Sand region had a hard time at the border, the kingdom's wrath. Lampod dispatched troops to escort him here. If we are still going ahead with the battle, it will definitely have to wait until spring. Thales walked on towards Nuven VII without looking around. The man stared at him again with an indecipherable gaze. Finally, most of the nobles were done being curious. They gave up the intention to watch the prince and immersed themselves in the feast once more. The nobles in Northland were extremely different compared to the ones in Constellation. In the Hall of Stars, the nobles always behaved elegantly. Even the village nobles who sat at the periphery tried their best to act civilized, whether in terms of behavior or in terms of clothing. This also made the three great Northern Territory clans, which were led by Rund, Fries, and Zemento, along with the nobles serving them, to stand out starkly among them. In contrast, even though these Northland nobles differed from one another in terms of status and personality, every single one of them behaved like brutes, from the way they sit and eat, to their appearances and clothing. Even when they were drinking, they made deliberate grunting sounds, dribbled few drops down the side of their beards, and slammed their goblets on the table. While drinking, they also loudly criticized their opponents, or their opponents scolded them. As he quietly observed the nobles' behavioral patterns, Thales walked on between two rows of tables. He could not help but notice that apart from servant girls, there was practically no female guest in the banquet. The ones here at the back of the banquet hall are from the likes of low-class nobles, courtiers of suzerains, meritorious knights and invited bureaucrats, Poutre reminded Thales in a soft voice. That well-dressed person ahead to your left is only a servant tasked to serve food. That person behind, to your right, standing in the corner, he looks like a slave, but he is a Gosling officer responsible for cooking meat. It is an honorary title that has been around since ancient times and can only be assumed by close vassals that are trusted by their suzerains. Asking close vassals to grill meat, goose-feed officer. Why? Without turning his head, Thales asked in puzzlement, isn't this something that should be done by those in the scullery? Or is this some kind of honor? HMPH, my prince. Did you know that in the Empire's history, the motivations for assassination and poisoning came from these quiet corners where people grilled meat? Poutre said in a low voice while remaining calm and collected. Thales kept his silence. They walked past the midpoint of the hall and as expected, the quality of the Northland nobles seemed to increase with their status. The amount of gesticulating people in the crowd reduced greatly. However, the amount of people who exchanged silent glances and whispered to each other increased exponentially. That empty space in the middle of the hall, in Constellation or Anlenzo dukedom, it would have been utilized as a dance floor or a performance stage. However, in Northland, Poutre walked past a few guests who had unpleasant expressions. Ignoring the soft curses of a boorish noble beside him, Poutre pointed at a round, empty space in the middle of the hall. His face twitched. Based on my experience, when the people are at the peak of drunkenness, it wouldn't be surprising if two brutes starts FC King vigorously there. Hearing Poutre swear for the first time, Thales frowned. Is it really appropriate to use this sort of language in front of the prince? We should observe the customs of the places we are in. Many years ago, I even saw an Extachian princess who stood by the streets and hurled all kinds of abuse with words like FCK and CNT. Poutre shook his head. Besides, even though you are a prince, you seem to be pretty accustomed to this kind of language. Ah, as your kingdom's prince, just like the honorable princes depicted in many songs and legends, I have experienced the suffering of the people which has made me virtuous and kind. Poutre snorted softly and noncommittally. They finally reached the end of the long tables. Among those around them, Archduke Olsius held the highest rank. No music and bards, no clowns and comedy show, no beautiful women, no voluptuous servant girls, no grilling of whole pigs, no tourneys between strong men, no celebration with the people in tents that span beyond the city wall. Archduke Olsius was grumbling loudly to the suzerains beside him. He then turned and shouted in King Neuvin's direction. What sort of FC King banquet is this? To Thales' surprise, many of the Northland nobles echoed in unison. They shouted protests at King Neuvin. This feels like a wet market. Thales sighed, suddenly remembering that he also felt the same about the national conference. Thales was helplessly dumbstruck. However, King Neuvin only stared coldly at the chaos caused by the nobles in the hall with no reaction. A loud but sarcastic voice rang from another long table in reply to Olsius. First of all, the day before the bitter cold winter is coming. Apart from lunatics like Lampod, all of Northland is living economically and stockpiling food to prepare for winter. Besides, Archduke Trenita, who sported a bull cut, narrowed his eyes and stood up. He watched the anxious Prince Thales from afar. The purpose of this banquet is to welcome the unwelcomed Prince of Constellation. One by one, the nobles beside him stood up and booed at Thales. Thales and everyone else from Constellation frowned almost simultaneously. Lastly, Rabian Olsius, while you are living in someone else's castle and palace, eating and drinking what's theirs, hee, and perhaps even FC King what's theirs, Archduke Trenita glanced at a plump-bottomed servant girl and flashed an interesting smile. It's better not to criticize the host's arrangements. Some of the Northland nobles let out cryptic laughs. Olsius shook his head in contempt and sat back down on his chair. Thales finally arrived in front King Neuvin. He bowed slightly. King Neuvin gazed closely at Thales. His dark green eyes were filled with complicated emotions. It made Thales very anxious. From the moment he stepped into Extit, every single suzerain he encountered was no simpleton, Archduke Lampod, Viscount Kenvida, and even the 5 archdukes present today. However, having gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, Thales was able to calmly face their hostility, intimidation, oppression, and even murderous intentions. Because Thales had a clear idea of what they wanted. The only person he could not understand was this old king who was already at the peak of power in Extit. Even though they exchanged few words between them, Thales could not help but shudder at the strange emotions that shone through the king's eyes, how he forced Thales to partake in his revenge, and his behavior in the meeting hall. Unpredictable people were always fearsome. King Neuvin rose slowly and raised his hand, gesturing to the leader of the White Blade Guards, Nicholas. Nicholas nodded and walked towards Thales. Please be seated. Your seat is the last one to King Neuvin's left. Thales turned his head and looked at the seat at the end of the long table that nobody cared about. Even though it's on the same row as the king, it's really far away from King Neuvin. It's almost in the corner. Standing behind him, Poutre sighed. Thales shrugged and nonchalantly walked to his seat. Ralph and Wya followed him closely. However, before he could sit comfortably, a hoary and old voice that sounded strange yet familiar rose in the hall. Raise your goblets, everyone. Thales turned his head dazedly. Beside him, Poutre remained composed. With considerable experience, he handed Thales a metal goblet of black ale. A toast, the gaunt vice diplomat said coolly. Thales turned and watched as King Neuvin, who had just lost his son, left his seat. He raised his wine goblet high and spoke to the crowd in a loud voice. Let us welcome our guest, the second prince of Constellation, Thales Jadastar. The hall, where noise had previously rose among them again, fell silent once more. The king slowly walked away from his seat and went to the front of the hall. Like an old lion that walked from its territory with menacing steps into land that belonged to other prides. The 5 archdukes fixed their gazes on him and raised their goblets. Their expressions were varied. May the northern wind test his courage, and may the snow polish his determination. Due to reasons known to all of you, I am unable to welcome him with a joyful heart. Looking around, King Neuvin spoke with a firm expression and cold voice. But, since he is already here. All the nobles listened quietly to their king. Many of them were watching Thales. We must not let anyone doubt the Northlanders' hospitality and the Extinction's hardiness. Even if that person is our mortal enemy. King Nuvan tapped his goblet. There was a hint of authority on his wrinkled face, and some of the hardiness of his younger days was noticed in his tone. Even if we fight to the death tomorrow, we must first honor our tradition. All eyes were on him. King Nuvan shook his goblet and roared furiously. For Extit. At that moment, every single person in the hall raised their goblets together and bellowed. For Extit. King Nuvan's gaze was sharp. He shouted once more, for Northland. The guests roared and responded with grandiosity. For Northland. Thunderous roars filled the entire hall like a tidal wave. It was deafening. Then, King Nuvan finished his drink in one swift movement. The expressions on all the nobles in the hall became solemn with the king's action. They started drinking and for some time, numerous grunting sounds echoed in the banquet hall. Thales creased his brows. Holding the heavy metal goblet in his hands, Thales forced himself to take a sip while under the gazes of many of those people behind him. Upon finishing his drink, King Nuvan turned to the table and slammed the goblet on the long table with a furious expression. Bang! The nobles in the hall also slammed down their goblets in unison. Bang, bang, bang. King Nuvan raised his head and roared under the various gazes of the crowd. Bring it on, eat, drink, fight, copulate, do whatever you want. During that second, Thales was completely stunned. Just what the hell is with this toast? Nuvan VII had a spirited expression on his face. With his sonorous but old voice filled with a Northlander's accent, he shouted to all his guests in the entire hall in the common language, drink until all of you are laying, rolling, sprawling, crawling, or carried out of my palace. You bastards! A second later, a similarly passionate shout erupted from all the guests in the hall in response, and it was like the sound of a loud tidal wave echoing in the entire banquet hall. Quite a large number of the Northlanders waved their fists and roared like wild animals to show their support for the king's feast. The guests returned to toasting with each other and fell into a state of drunken ecstasy. The entire hall instantly went back to a state of chaos filled with loud noises and bustling activity. The sound of human voices bubbled into a deafening pitch, and it was even louder than before. Poutre whispered softly beside Thales' ear, a unique toast. This is a specialty in the north. Thales rolled his eyes and put on an expression as if he could do nothing about the situation. I do not need you to remind me of that, I can tell. At that moment, King Nuvan suddenly whipped his head around when he returned to his table and cast a profound look at Thales. Thales' heart froze. He read the message behind the king's gaze. He also knew that King Nuvan absolutely did not intend for him to enjoy the feast. However, before he could turn his head around to discuss with his subordinates, an unexpected guest first arrived in front of his seat to visit the second prince of Constellation. Thales was stunned. Standing before him was a kind-looking old woman dressed in a red robe. Good evening, esteemed Prince Thales. She squinted to look at him. Her voice was incredibly gentle, and her smile was filled with a warmth that could ease people's hearts. My name is Kalshan. Thales flashed her an amiable smile, though he was completely lost as to what was going on. But before he could answer, Poutre spoke up first beside him. Excuse me, madam, but is there anything special you want with us? During that instant, Thales noticed that Poutre's expression had turned incredibly sour by his side. In fact, his body had become rigid as he glared at the old woman in front of him. The attendant Ya's breathing also froze while he stood behind Thales. A question popped up in Thales' head. They seemed to know, this old woman, this Kalshan. Before Poutre finished speaking, his face turned pale, as if even breathing was a chore, and he opened his mouth to speak, Your Excellency, esteemed Red Witch. Red Witch, Thales stared at the kindly old woman in front of him, bemused. Witch, what the heck? Oh, it's just some emotions of mine acting up. I came specially to ask you a question, Your Highness. The kind-looking Kalshan squinted her eyes further and shook her head slightly, as if she was slightly embarrassed. How is my son faring lately in Constellation? Son. Thales was stunned again. The second prince employed the perfect smile he had learned from a certain young duke and answered faintly, May I know who your son might be? The Red Witch Kalshan smiled amiably. Ah, how forgetful I am, I completely forgot to mention it. My son is known in Constellation as... In the next second, under Thales' puzzled gaze, this gentle old lady Kalshan started rubbing her hands together non-stop, as if she was afraid of the cold, and then... She said a name that instantly caused his expression to change. Yodel Kato. Chapter 140 The Red Witch. If Thales was to create a list called the People I Trust the Most, from within the royal court of Constellation, Yodel, who never showed his true face to others, would almost undoubtedly rank at the top. From the time he fled from Red Street Market, to the dangerous experience in Vine Manor, and the assassination attempt in front of Renaissance Palace, the masked protector had repeatedly risked his life to save Thales. In the most recent incident, he almost lost his life for it. Moreover, The masked protector was also the only one in the royal court of Constellation who knew about his identity as a calamity, but still kept it a secret for him. Thales especially treasured this. However, Thales only realized that he knew very little about this mysterious secret protector of the royal family when he heard his name in the kingdom of the great dragon. He knew practically nothing about his appearance, age, background, personality, and experiences. He had to admit with embarrassment that to him, Yodel was more like a familiar stranger. Even though Yodel did a lot for him, he never cared about what went on with Yodel. No, I do know some things, Thales thought. Gilbert once told him that there was deep hatred between Yodel and Extit's 5 war generals. For example, he stabbed Black Sand Regions, Fire Knight, Tolja in the back. This was also the reason why he could not come to Extit. However, there were many more questions than this when it came to the masked protector. Thales recalled their last, and most sincere, long conversation in Mindy's hall, and he felt his heart clench. Yodel, no. Thales shook his head and tried not to think about the masked protector's possible dark side. After all, there were many incidents where Yodel saved Thales after that. And now? Laughter rang from the other side of the hall. More than 10 Northland nobles seemed to be playing some game. Thales refocused his attention on the kind-looking old lady. This old woman of Extit claims that she is Yodel's. Madam, you are Yodel's. While sizing up this old lady called Kalshan, Thales tried hard to find any similarities between her and Yodel, other than their mysteriousness. He said hesitantly, Yodel's mother. Please do not doubt it. At my age, why would I joke about having a son? Kalshan smiled and shook her head. Thales nodded awkwardly and shot Putre a helpless glance. What is going on? Who on earth is this old woman? Putre continued to stare cautiously at the old lady, but when he saw Thales' glance, he shook his head slightly. I have not seen him in a long time. I miss him very much. Kalshan did not seem to care about Thales and Putre's exchange of glances. She wore a nostalgic and loving gaze as she talked to herself. That child never spoke much since he was young. He's stubborn and horrible at expressing himself. Him being all alone out there is so worrying. He must have brought you a lot of trouble while he served the royal family. Thales froze. Never spoke much, stubborn, horrible at expressing himself. The masked protector's silent figure appeared in his mind. He also recalled his confrontation with Yodel in Mindy's hall that day, and what Yodel said when he appeared mysteriously in the Hall of Stars. You will be better than him. Please don't worry, I believe he is doing very well right now. In his reminiscence, Thales pursed his lips. Another wave of uproar that sounded like jeering rang suddenly through the noisy hall. 2 guests were fighting on a table. Thales suddenly realized that he was unconsciously continuing Kalshan's words. He immediately stopped talking and stared cautiously at Kalshan. However, the latter was still smiling amicably. Knowing that he's doing well, I feel at ease. Please bear with his shortcomings. After all, as a mother, I know my child very well. Kalshan nodded in a reassured manner and then sighed. Little Yodel has an extraordinarily kind heart. Thales forced a smile. He recalled a scene where Yodel raised his sword in the dark and took somebody's life. A kind heart, he could not help feeling puzzled. Yodel's mother, why is she in Extit? This old woman, wait, old woman. A wave of memories flashed past his mind. Ah. Staring at Kalshan, Thales quivered and yelped in surprise. The old lady was still smiling at the second prince of Constellation. Her manner was elegant and her expression was kind-looking. Thales remembered. The day he left Eternal Star City and departed for Extit, the king and some suzerains came to send him off. The last person who came forward to talk to him was the fearsome old man in black who held a walking stick. When you reach Extit, please help an old man like me pass a message to an old woman. You will know when you see her. Could it be that you are? Thales widened his eyes. Kalshan continued to smile benignly. Sorry, but an elder seemed to have mentioned something about you. Thales realized that he had forgotten his manners. He said in embarrassment, you know. Elder. Kalshan's smile became even brighter. Let me guess, is it a sinister old man who always wears black and likes to stay in the dark? I heard that in these recent few years he has been using a walking stick. Thales frowned. You know Morat. He suddenly became extremely alert. Someone who was specially mentioned by the chief of the kingdom's secret intelligence department. Apart from dangerous, he could not think of any other word to describe her. Hearing the Black Prophet's name, Putre looked at his prince with furrowed brows. Your Highness, I can imagine what you are feeling right now. Kalshan smiled and said, I reckon that it is not enjoyable to be acquainted with him, is it? Thales had his answer. Perhaps Morat was giving him a warning. The second prince sighed. He told me that, if I meet an old woman who comes forward to me of her own accord, I'm sorry. These are Morat's original words. It's all right, that old man looks polite, but he actually doesn't know anything about courtesy at all. Kalshan shook her head nonchalantly. The wrinkles on her face limbered up. Heartbreakers are the best at swaying people's hearts. I won't buy into that. Heartbreakers. Thales' mouth fell open slightly in surprise, he then immediately closed it. That sentence carried quite a lot of information. He turned his head and awkwardly said, "Actually, the Black Prophet, I'm referring to Lord Morad Hansen, asked me to pass a message to you." "He asked a prince to pass a message to me?" Kalshan raised her eyebrows and gave Thales a smile that reached her eyes. "I really look forward to hearing it, Your Highness." The old woman's kind smile only made Thales feel rather pressured. Compared to the overbearing and substantial duress felt when faced with the Black Prophet, the way Kalshan uttered such disturbing information in such a gentle and friendly manner that it made Thales feel really awkward and also made him feel that he was absolutely lacking in the ability to handle her. Thales gave a hollow laugh. "He told you not to cross the line." Having said that, Thales suddenly realized that the old woman had a strange expression on her face. Not to cross the line. Kalshan shut her eyes and inhaled deeply. She then lowered her head with a sigh. Her expression was complicated and hard to decipher. She muttered faintly, "So what?" Before a puzzled Thales could react, Kalshan stopped her reminiscing and flashed a smile once more. "Your Highness, you are in a difficult situation right now, struggling to survive in the crevices of Constellation and the Dragon, and trying your best to hold your ground amid the vortex created by the king and the archdukes." Kalshan sized Thales up with a gentle gaze. "However, please believe me when I say that compared to Morat's situation, all this is nothing." The next moment, in front of Thales and Putre's bewildered expressions, the old lady nodded elegantly and left. "Thank you for your time." Thales averted his gaze from the old lady's slowly retreating figure. He could not help but notice that as the old lady walked, all the nobles of various ranks, slaves, and guards respectfully saluted and made way for her. Thales furrowed his brows. He could roughly guess her identity. "My God, behind them," Wya exclaimed softly, "did I just see the Red Witch?" Thales turned and looked at his attendant. "Sorry, I thought that all of them, do not simply appear in front of other people." Them, Thales exhaled and grabbed a piece of buttered bread in resignation. "So, my guess was correct. That Kalshan is." "You're right," with a solemn expression, Putre replied in his expertise, "a song." Constellation sparkled, but the dark areas are still pitch black. The great dragon soared in the sky, but there were endless shadows beneath its wings. Thales and Wya looked at the Bard cum vice diplomat in unison. "That lady is a fearsome character who is on par with the kingdom's secret intelligence department's Black Prophet." Putre's gaze was harsh. He said in a soft voice, "She is the top person in charge of Extit's secret room, Kalshan the Red Witch." Feeling frustrated, Thales rolled his eyes. To be able to maintain a foothold in the royal court of Extit as a woman, and to have others know her as an evil witch, Your Highness, you must be vigilant, she is definitely not just here to spectate. He stared from afar at two Northlanders fighting intensely barehanded among the crowd, then said dispiritedly, "Both of you might not believe this, but after seeing that lady, I find myself missing Morad very much right now." Thales chewed on his bread dejectedly. "By the way, who is Yodel?" Putre looked at Thales in curiosity. "He serves the royal family." "About that, it's a secret that is kept within the royal family." Thales picked up a metal fork and stabbed an onion, hard. "The secret protector of the Supreme King of Constellation is actually the son of Extit's head of intelligence, Haya, another bottomless pit of gossip. In this banquet specially held to celebrate the Prince of Constellation's arrival and the gathering of the 5 archdukes, even though Thales was nominally the person that was to be welcomed, he was undoubtedly treated quite coldly. Fortunately, there was not much trouble either. Occasionally, some of the Northland nobles who might have been gawking came forward to greet Thales. On Putre's advice, Thales managed to properly return their greetings. There were also some who drank too much and came forward to provoke Thales, but Lord Merk was always able to allocate people in the nick of time to drag away wave after wave of drunkards. Thales got to enjoy the grand banquet in peace, even though a 7 or 8-year-old child could not eat much anyway. A few hours later, while watching the still lively hall, Thales asked Wya in a bored tone, "How much longer will this go on? I feel as if I'm becoming a Northlander." Just now, a few drunk nobles who were in a family feud sparked a group fight taking place in 3 different locations, causing more excitement in the already noisy hall. It continued on until members of the White Blade Guards and the Palace Guards went forward in unison to stop them with their fists. A very long time. It is only 11 at night right now. With furrowed brows, Wya looked into the distance in disbelief. A guest with a battered face and a swollen nose was helped back into his seat. He then drank another goblet of wine while swearing and proceeded to hurl the goblet at another person's face. The prince's attendant shook his head and said, "I heard from my friends in Northland that Extit's banquets usually last until morning. Moreover, this is the king's banquet that signifies Dragon Cloud City's reputation. It is also the gathering of the 5 archdukes." Thales shook his head with glassy eyes. The order of the banquet, which was already barely non-existent since it was held so willfully, began to break down. There were even drunkards who staggered around. Some nobles put their arms around servant girls and left the hall. Strange noises were then subsequently heard coming from outside the hall. Even the vassals and followers around the 5 archdukes left their original seats and joined those who were drunk and excited. King Nuvan and Nicholas had left the hall a long time ago, leaving Merc behind to calmly supervise the banquet. As for Poutre, Thales narrowed his eyes and stared at the gaunt man. Poutre put his arms around countless Northlanders, often bursting into laughter. Thales could not help but criticize him internally. Why is this person blending in so well? Thales pressed his face against the table and exhaled painfully. Please tell me that the banquets in Constellation are not this insane. They are probably not. Wya smiled awkwardly. Of course not. Thales raised his head. Poutre held a barrel of rye wine, heroic spirit Palace's specialty. He staggered over with his eyes shut and muttered, Constellation's banquets are more civilized and appropriate to the occasions. All the insanities are covered up. For example, the host of the banquet would prepare special rooms for trysts. Then, there are the bushes in the gardens, and the quiet and secluded basements. From what I know, your father, King Kessel, was an expert at all of these secret meetings during banquets when he was younger. Thales rolled his eyes, but Poutre opened his eyes, and his expression changed slightly. The vice diplomat of Constellation said in a low voice, I have received Shile's signal. Thales perked up. The king has already left, and the people around the 5 archdukes are very drunk. Poutre nodded solemnly. I reckon that it's time to seek them out for a chat. As the banquet continued until close to 12 in the morning, the Archduke of Prestige Orchid, Rabian Ulceus, left the hall. He was escorted by 2 attendants. Standing beside a secluded window outside the banquet hall, he gazed at the moon outside. He seemed to be waiting for someone. 2 pairs of footsteps came up behind him, one was louder than the other. Archduke Ulceus turned. He immediately creased his brows. You are the one who asked to meet with me. Holding the slip of paper he just received, the Archduke stared in disbelief at the person before him, the Prince of Constellation, Thales Jadastar. Accompanied by Wya, Thales stared at the Archduke's full beard and flashed a bright smile. Yes. Ulceus stared at Thales, and then at the slip of paper in his hand. His expression slowly changed. Thales inhaled deeply. It's time, it's starting. He slowly said, Your Grace. Right then, Archduke Ulceus suddenly snorted coldly, cutting him off. Thales was only halfway through his sentence before he was stunned. Boring. Ulceus glanced at him with disdain and shook his head. Then he turned and left. Thales widened his eyes. Am I that despicable? I took great pains to find an opportunity to meet you privately, Your Grace. Thales took a step forward. He said with a frown, At least listen to what I have to say. There is nothing to talk about with a 7-year-old child. Ulceus did not even intend to turn his head. Thales clenched his teeth. There's no other way. Then, the second Prince of Constellation yelled at the Archduke of Prestige Orchid's retreating figure. Rabian Ulceus, do you know who is going to be the next King of Extit? Archduke Ulceus immediately halted in his step. He slowly turned his head and stared at Thales with a strange expression. Thales panted and said agitatedly, Lampod. Ulceus' expression changed slightly. Thales calmed his breathing a little. He then raised his head and looked at the full-bearded man with a firm expression. The Archduke of Black Sand, Chapman Lampod.